On March 15, 2011, Martin Sims was wandering down the streets of Carson, California. His clothes were ragged, he was filthy, and gibbering like a madman with a full beard and long, unkempt hair. His body was covered in scars, but he showed no signs of malnutrition. What made Martin's sudden appearance so remarkable? He'd been missing for 3 years. When he was interviewed by police, they asked him where he'd been all this time. They couldn't believe his answer. He'd been trapped in an IKEA since 2008, but this was no ordinary IKEA. This was a dangerous anomaly that would come to be known as SCP-3008. Martin's strange answers in his interview were laughed off by his interviewing officers, who assumed he was either crazy or under the influence of something, but they caught the attention of an SCP Foundation field agent embedded in the precinct. The report was passed up the chain to a local site director who approved a detachment of Foundation field operatives to look into Martin's case. While he was reluctant to lead the Foundation agents back to the offending IKEA, the Foundation can be extremely persuasive. His screams of "Please, I'm begging you, don't take me back, don't make me go back," were noted but ultimately disregarded. When the SCP Foundation had triangulated the position of SCP-3008, which was indeed an active IKEA, the entire retail zone was closed and barricaded under the pretense of a severe black mold infestation. Armed Foundation personnel also arrived on the site shortly after, based on Martin's vague statements that there were creatures of some kind inside. Due to his deteriorating mental health, Martin was unable to provide a great deal of lucid information on the specific traits of SCP-3008. But one phrase he kept repeating was "bigger on the inside." Once researchers were satisfied that Martin had delivered all the pertinent information he was able to, he was administered Foundation amnestics to erase his memory of the last 3 years and return to his family. A cover story was formulated. Martin had been kidnapped and abused for 3 years by a mentally unbalanced stalker in downtown Carson. He'd been able to escape as said stalker took his own life out of guilt, a suicide that the Foundation expertly fabricated to make their cover story airtight. With the loose end of Martin Sims taken care of, the true observation of SCP-3008 could begin. A base set around the perimeter of the mysterious IKEA kept a 24-hour watch on the building, covering all potential entrances and exits. No exploratory missions had yet been approved by the Foundation Ethics Committee, so they first wanted to perform a week of external observation to see if any of the store's anomalous properties extended beyond the confines of the building. After a week of nothing, it appeared they did not. A local site director approved of the use of 20 disposable Class D personnel to explore the interior of SCP-3008. The D-Class operatives would be split into 4 squads of 5 men, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta Squad. Each would be assigned a different quadrant of the store and would deliver information back to the control team on site via a live audio and video link. 3 of the 4 teams upon entering the store reported nothing out of the ordinary. Neither the audio or video they were sending back indicated anything different from a standard IKEA store, from the flat-pack wardrobes to the Swedish meatballs. Team Delta, however, suddenly began experiencing a scrambled audio and video connection. Shortly after, communication with Team Delta dropped off entirely. They disappeared somewhere inside the store and haven't been seen since, with one notable exception. After the disappearance and the extraction of teams, Foundation researchers classified SCP-3008 as Euclid because its anomalous properties were at least confined to the interior of the store, and even then seemingly not the entire interior. The anomalous area within SCP-3008 became known as SCP-3008-1, and containment appeared to be 100% secure. There was no telling how many people had already gone missing in the store over the years, but the disappearances must be stopped. The Foundation maintained constant surveillance around the perimeter of SCP-3008, but it appeared they could prevent any further incidents by simply preventing other civilians from accessing the IKEA store. Martin's ravings about monsters were assumed to just be the product of delirium, until a surviving member of Delta Team suddenly reappeared. The date was November 3rd, 2011. It was a cold night, a few hours after what would have been closing time if the store were still active, and 7 months after the extraction teams had disappeared somewhere in the confines of SCP-3008. There had been no anomalous activity outside the store since the perimeter was first secured, and the Foundation researchers hadn't expected that to change until the last surviving member of Delta Team came barging out of the store's entrance. Startled field operatives were amazed to see him again, but they were even more amazed to see what was following him out of the store, repeating the same phrase, "The store is now closed, please exit the building." Despite the fact that the entity chasing the Delta Team survivor was wearing the yellow shirt and blue pants of an IKEA store employee, the being definitely was not human. It was around 7 feet tall with no visible face. The entity had grossly extended limbs, with each arm being around 5 or 6 feet long and ending in a huge oversized hand. The whole process was so sudden that the field agents present at the perimeter weren't able to save the Delta Team survivor, as the entity reached forward with his freakishly long arms, grabbed him and twisted his head off like a child with a doll. The field operatives present drew their weapons and peppered the entity with bullets. It would later be classified as SCP-3008-2. The being appeared to collapse and die from the physical trauma, at which point it and the body of the former Delta Team survivor were taken for an autopsy by Foundation researchers. There were no biological abnormalities of the body of the Delta Team survivor, so it did not appear that the anomalous properties of SCP-3008-1 had any effect on the physiology of its occupants. He was not malnourished despite being missing for months, and the contents of his stomach looked to be half-digested food consistent with the menu of a typical IKEA store restaurant. SCP-3008-2, on the other hand, raised a number of perplexing biological questions. The autopsy revealed that the creature's clothes were actually part of its body, like an additional layer of skin. The creature lacked blood or any kind of vascular system. Even stranger, the entity didn't appear to have bones or internal organs, not even a brain or nervous system. It was a being made entirely of skin all the way to its core. How it was able to move, or even live for that matter, remains a mystery. Though when you work for the SCP Foundation, you learn to accept that some things will always remain unexplained. One thing was certain though, Martin Sims was right about his monsters. After the incident with Delta Team, the Foundation deemed that sending manned explorations into the heart of SCP-3008 was too much of a liability and planned a series of drone-based reconnaissance missions into the anomaly. The first of these drones experienced connection issues and failed when attempting to venture into the IKEA's anomalous zone. However, after a lengthy period of trial and error, the Foundation was able to establish a more secure connection with its drones, even when deep into the SCP-3008-1 anomalous zone. It was only then that some of the most extraordinary discoveries were made. SCP-3008-1 seemed to break the laws of spatial reality, as the area of the IKEA's interior was at least an order of magnitude larger than its exterior. Just as Martin Sims had said, it was bigger on the inside, but just how much bigger? The Foundation has yet to find evidence of any physical terminators within the store that might indicate SCP-3008-1 has an endpoint, while an area of at least 10 kilometers squared has been uncovered in SCP-3008-1. It could, in theory, be infinite. Laser rangefinder tests, which are normally very reliable, have only given inconclusive results. Interestingly, the anomalous area doesn't have any clear visual differences from the rest of the IKEA store, except that it extends forever. An individual trapped within the confines of SCP-3008-1 wouldn't even realize they've entered an anomalous zone until they tried to locate an exit and leave, at which point they'd find they were already hopelessly lost. The geography of SCP-3008-1 does at least appear to be consistent, so people trapped within are theoretically able to retrace their steps and escape if they haven't already ventured too deep. According to data collected during the drone reconnaissance missions, SCP-3008-2, of which there appear to be a vast population, would wander the stores aimlessly during the day. They are unresponsive to the drone's presence and did not appear to be aggressive. While the physical descriptions of these creatures could vary slightly, they all follow the same overall trend. Clothes consistent with an IKEA uniform, no face, either seemingly too tall or too short, and limbs that are grossly out of proportion with their bodies. As the Foundation began sending drones deeper into SCP-3008-1, they found another incredible discovery. There was an unknown population of humans trapped inside IKEA's anomalous zone, and these people had used the IKEA furniture around them to create entire settlements and towns within the store. There were several of these towns, all of which seemed to cohabitate peacefully. Even Foundation personnel found this development in their research to be truly extraordinary. Since SCP-3008 was first identified, there have been only 14 civilian escapes. Some had been trapped inside for months, others had been in there for years, some far longer than Martin's 3-year stint. While every one of these escapees has eventually been released back to their home, after a liberal application of amnestics and a proper cover story has been devised, the Foundation interviewed each of them extensively first. According to each of these escapees, the people trapped inside the IKEA have built an entirely new society across the various settlements. Contrary to the Lord of the Flies expectations of a group of people isolated and afraid, there's immense cooperation between the trapped civilians. The food in the several IKEA restaurants in SCP-3008-1 mysteriously replenishes while nobody's there, so there's no threat of starving, and the automatic turning on and off of the lights forms as a rudimentary kind of day and night cycle. Nighttime, however, is when things get dangerous, as the SCP-3008-2 entities, which are known to the people inside as the Staff, become extremely hostile after dark. Aggressive hordes of the Staff swarm the settlements at night, repeating, "This door is now closed, please exit the building." The civilians inside are usually able to repel these attacks with minimal casualties, but the constant war of attrition slowly wears down those inside. The bodies of the creatures also need to be removed from the area after each attack, as the presence of corpses or even parts of corpses has been known to heighten the ferocity of the next night's attack. During the day, the Staff return to a docile and unresponsive state, though they'll still defend themselves violently if anyone dares to attack. Over the course of the interviews with the 14 escapees, Foundation researchers were able to answer another of their key questions. How had so many people gone missing in the store for so long without being noticed? But the answer they received only raised many more unsettling queries. According to the escapees, there were people inside the settlements that, despite being otherwise of entirely sound mind and standard intelligence, seemed to lack very common knowledge that even a child should know. For example, some of them weren't aware of the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, or stranger still, the existence of the Statue of Liberty. This led the researchers to a frightening conclusion. SCP-3008-1 may not only be a nexus point of multiple IKEA stores in our dimension, it could be connected to IKEAs in every dimension where IKEAs exist. While it only abducts a handful of people from each store over an extended period of time, it suddenly becomes clear how this SCP was able to trap so many people without detection over such a long period of time, which in turn led to an even more terrifying revelation. The SCP Foundation may not have SCP-3008-1 as contained as they thought. It might even be tucked away in an IKEA store somewhere near you, just waiting for you to visit. After all, there's always room for one more.
You edge the poolside, chlorine-stenched air filling your nose, the sound of splashing and lifeguards whistling bouncing off the indoor pool facility walls. The water ripples, family and friends egging you to cannonball in, the pool almost beckoning you to jump with its suggestive waves. Yet there remains an underlying fear, one that brings your hands to your face and causes your teeth to chatter, even as the pool, clear as glass with chlorine, hides no secrets. A monster, some teeth-gnashing megalodon ascending from the depths of extinction, Leviathan curling its barbed tail to strike its prey at any moment, or even some vast, unknowable force, ancient as Earth, hardly comprehensible to human minds, waiting, dreaming to breach the surface. No matter what form this gargantuan, invisible monster takes, you know one thing. Once you jump in, you will not return to shore. You take a moment, recompose yourself, and laugh off the fear. Maybe a product of too much research on the bloop, that deep ocean sound continuing to confound scientists as to its cause. Or maybe too much binging infographics videos on sea monsters, krakens and Loch Ness monsters, mysterious globsters cast onto shores throughout America. Whatever the origin, the thought seems ridiculous to you now, and your fears regarding invisible sharks stalking the pool perimeter escape your mind as you hurl yourself into the water. SCP-1128. In the vast archives of a hidden site, stuffed into a drawer amongst uncountable horrors like it, the SCP Foundation holds a description of a vast, unfathomable horror that'll make you more suspicious the next time you pass a pool, lake, or even a bathtub or puddle of water. SCP-1128 is a gigantic aquatic monster lurking in waters unknown, and that's all the Foundation will let anyone not assigned to testing know about it. While the Foundation has never shed away from those Moby Dicks of the deep, including the several thousand-kilometer-long arthropod SCP-169, and has even utilized such predators in the past for their own benefit, like the lengthy beast SCP-3000, SCP-1128 poses a unique challenge. Anyone who knows of its description beyond surface-level details will fall under the anomaly's effect. The representation you see now is merely an artist's interpretation of the basic prompt. The Foundation, of course, had to discover the monster's effects in the first place. The chain of communication becomes foggy, but a tip from an unknown source alerted the Foundation to the monster's existence and details regarding its manifestation. One man who had stumbled upon the entity's full description started developing acute thalassophobia, the fear of large bodies of water. Not bodies in the water, mind you. The man refused to relax on the beach or fly overseas, claiming he could see the monster's dark silhouette lurking underwater, ever scouting for him. This eventually extended to even closed bodies of water, like lakes, ponds, and pools, still insisting that the creature swam under the surface, trailing him wherever he went. His friends dismissed him as crazy, and he too believed he had fallen under some hysteria. He decided to take a nice, warm bath to soothe his mind and ease his troubles. He turned on the faucet and let the tub fill up. He put on his best bathing suit, ready to calm his anxiety once and for all. This had been plaguing his mind for far too long, and he was ready to rid all the negativity surrounding this phobia. Basically, he was sick and tired of being sick and tired over the idea of it all. He mustered up the courage, and with the anticipation to just simply relax, he took his first confident step into the tub. He paused for a moment and breathed a sigh of relief. He picked up his other foot and stepped fully into the bath. Splash! He fell straight down right through the tub. Waves and bubbles blocked his vision. His arms flailed as he sunk deeper into an abyss of water and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen, he thought. Several moments later, while still in a full-on panic, the buoyancy of his body began to slow his sinking. The bubbles from his underwater screams rose above him, and he began to follow their direction, scrambling back up to where he'd come. Just as he made it back to the surface of the tub water, choking and hyperventilating in terror, he swore he could see a distant creature, the very same that stalked him through oceans and pools, staring at him. Shaking, he hoisted himself out of the water and ran out of the house. Hysterical, he ran through the surrounding neighborhood, desperately searching for someone he could relay his experience to. Blinded by fear, he neglected to spot a puddle in the middle of the road he ran on. He raised his foot, arched forward, and landed straight into the seemingly shallow water. Splash! Again, he found himself completely submerged and drowning. After a minute, he did emerge from the puddle, but not in one piece. Knowledgeable of this incident, the Foundation set about expunging any traces of the monster's description from the world, physical and digital. The description had low distribution according to the results of Foundation web crawlers, but this hardly stopped the Foundation's endeavor. With forum posts deleted, individuals located and amnesticized, and catalogs trawled to ensure the description did not proliferate, the Foundation engaged in what it does best: questionably ethical experiments. First, they had an anonymous D-class, uninformed of the creature's effect, read the description of the beast. While the pamphlet they gave him confused him somewhat, he didn't feel particularly frightened by the entity, and he confusedly put on the diving suit the Foundation testers provided him. As they connected him to a cable and told him to enter a bathtub, the D-class did as they instructed him. The D-class expressed initial confusion at the tub's depth, remarking that it looked so tiny from the outside. As the D-class continued to descend, he analyzed his surroundings, realizing the nautical reality that enveloped him. He asked how an ocean got stuffed into a bathtub, but the test organizer had no room for miscellaneous talk. He continued to descend until he hit the sandy bottom, seaweed covering the ocean floor. The D-class looked around. Tropical fish swam in schools, coral covered the seabed, and to his right dropped an immense cliff, a sheer edge. The test organizer advised the D-class to approach the cliff, and he begrudgingly complied. As he struggled in his diving suit, he fell back and screamed. SCP-1128, the aquatic horror, swam distantly, gracefully even, and paid no attention to the D-class so fixated upon it. He realized that the creature matched the one he read on the pamphlet, and almost complained about this when he saw a blue whale swimming alongside SCP-1128. Compared to the monster, the whale looked like a guppy. The whale glided in front of SCP-1128's jaws. The monster remained tranquil, stared at its prey, and bit the whale in two with one chaw. Its teeth glistened in the water. The test operator requested the D-Class to pull back, and as the cable began to draw him toward where he came, D-Class stared at the creature, swallowing the chunks of whale whole. The D-Class's eyes remained fixated on the creature, partially in fright, partially in awe. He wondered how ocean trawlers hadn't discovered such a giant beast yet, with the world effectively under 100% surveillance, something the D-Class knew far too well as a convict. Yet the D-Class recognized, and if not comprehended, partially understood the ocean's vastness and mystery. The dark depths reveal no inkling as to their contents, and a creature like a giant squid or the coelacanth can remain in hiding for centuries, if not millennia. It held him in wondrous thought to consider the vastness of the depths. When SCP-1128 stopped and stared at the D-Class, this feeling of wonder was quickly replaced with fear. As the creature approached, the D-Class pleaded with the test operators for help. As the test operators accelerated the rate of the cable returning, the D-Class took short, shallow breaths, filling his body with dangerous nitrogen as he ascended, further impairing his judgment. He had devolved into gibberish and screaming when face to face, the monster consumed its prey. The cable went slack, and the test operator pulled up only a broken wire, snapped, the water turning a cloudy red. The test operator knew that the unprotected D-Class had no chance at survival against the monster, but he could potentially arm and shield them. He had another similarly ignorant D-Class once again dress in a scuba suit and enter the tub. However, the test operator placed the D-Class within a shark cage, a la the movie Jaws, and lowered the cage in with another cable and winch system. While unsure how this would fare with SCP-1128, the test operator remained hopeful that the D-Class could survive and recount his story. Unfortunately, as the cage lowered into the tub, the test operator received no response from the D-Class until the line spontaneously tightened, snapped, and loosened. Hoping to find the D-Class's remains, the test operator only found shredded pieces of metal, torn and twisted like taffy. The test operator decided that he could utilize the Foundation's arsenal to his advantage and used an anomalously toughened shark cage in his testing, perhaps using an anomaly like the clockwork machine SCP-914. He gained approval from his higher-ups to undergo this procedure, and after some testing, behind a shining, strong-as-titanium shark cage, which he placed another D-Class within. Hoping for a success with the monster, however, proved unsatisfactory, as the same thing happened as the previous test, only without any sort of metallic remains. While bitter that the monster had won again, he wondered where the cage had landed. Meanwhile, Foundation forces labored tirelessly to find SCP-1128's location, hoping to avoid any civilian contact with the creature. Luckily, a GPS signal established itself upon the most recent D-Class's test, with the tracking device on the D-Class signifying the monster's general location. The Foundation had redacted the location of the monster, perhaps in a vain attempt to hide a very near threat from potential readers. The Foundation set up a team of only the most talented boaters in its forces, Mobile Containment Force Kappa-12 Sea Devils. Upon arriving at the location, the Sea Devils discovered the previously enhanced shark cage, completely undamaged. However, closer inspection revealed traces of human DNA on the bars, though the Foundation could not confirm whether the DNA belonged to the previously sent D-Class. The test operator, while glad his shark cage survived the monster's attack, still found himself dissatisfied with the overall results of the test. He knew he needed to quell this creature's impact before a large population viewed it or knew of it. But the horrible beast had evaded all attempts at peaceful interaction. Perhaps with a madness not unlike Captain Ahab yearning for the death of his white whale, the test operator armed a D-Class with a specialized weapon, designed to deal with aquatic threats promptly. This weapon, potentially another of the Foundation's precious arsenal, could potentially harm, if not kill, the creature. While he knew the Foundation's mission statement forbade unnecessary destruction, the test operator felt it may turn necessary if matters turn any worse. Thus, he sent his armed D-Class through the tub once more, ready to engage the beast in combat. The attempt, as one may expect, did not last long. The D-Class, upon spotting the creature, aimed his weapon at the monster and attacked it, but rather than drive the creature away, it only turned intently upon the D-Class. as if it desired a fight. The D-Class barely managed to scrape SCP-1128 before the creature devoured the D-Class, leaving the test operator once again empty-handed. Defeated and without any more resources to deal with the beast, the test operator ceased his attempts at besting the creature and followed the Foundation's more cautious approach, expunging any publicly found descriptions of SCP-1128 as needed and diverting any vessels away from the anomaly's exclusion zone, as maintained by the Sea Devils. While the creature had proven treacherous in unexpected situations prior, engulfing the man who first heard the creature's description in a rain puddle, researchers could hardly expect what would transpire. A D-Class afflicted with the monster's effect and observed for testing avoided all bodies of water as required. Eventually, however, the D-Class needed to interact with some kind of water, drinking water. In a choice between a little water exposure or certain death, the D-Class felt inclined to choose the former. He filled his cup with water and, for fun, placed his finger into the cup, dropping it into the water. SCP-1128, unseen from the outside, violently pulled the D-Class through the cup into its watery domain. The D-Class had not a chance to scream. This alarmed containment staff, now cognizant that even the tiniest specks of water could transport an afflicted person into SCP-1128's ocean territory. This proved particularly strenuous when a new report of a potential SCP-1128 manifestation arose. An old woman, isolated with her cats and knitting supplies, found an article online with a description of the monster. Frightened and disgusted by what she read, she closed the article and continued on with her monotonous life. Such a life would take a turn for the worse, however, when she too developed that all-encompassing water-based fear. Her apartment overlooked an outdoor pool, and one day, looking outside, she swore she could see that same dark silhouette as the man did, lurking in the water among kids and parents playing. She swiftly closed the window curtains and taped the seams shut, allowing no light to peek through. Eventually, this paranoia affected her hygiene, neglecting showers and baths for fear of the creature's wrath. She swore she could see the silhouette in any individual droplet of water. Her skin began to flake as she avoided water as much as humanly possible, cracks developing on her arms, legs, and face, inflaming into rashes and itches. Her scratching further increased the flaking. She even eliminated water from her diet, sealing the faucets with duct tape and consuming exclusively orange juice. She threw out her cat's water bowls, dehydrating them. They pleaded with her as she continued to devolve, avoiding any contact with the outside world, even as it attempted to contact her. Eventually, a concerned neighbor contacted the local police concerning the situation, and the case caught the Foundation's radar, recognizing the symptoms of a potential SCP-1128 infection. A mobile task force disguised themselves as civilians to enter the apartment building and potentially interfere with the woman's condition. They entered the complex, climbing up the stairs with barraging equipment for forced entry, as would prove necessary to use to enter the woman's apartment. She had nailed the door shut with wood and sealed the cracks along the sides with plaster in an attempt to keep out any water vapor. She had similarly blocked the window with wood planks. A horrid miasma of dead skin and citrus filled the apartment, the old woman soaking it in, ever avoiding the dreaded monster. The Foundation task force attempted peaceful entry, knocking on the door and asking if anyone lived in the apartment. The woman couldn't speak if she wanted to. Her throat had dried to near silence, save a croak. Suddenly, the task force and the woman heard a rumbling noise outside. Thunder, rain. The woman panicked and yelled, "Don't come in here!" in a froggy voice. The task force eventually decided they needed to use their equipment and entered via barrage. The door collapsed and an immediate dense air clogged the task force's sight, blinding and choking them. The woman shrieked and backed against the window inadvertently. The task force insisted they were here to help the woman, but she simply heaved heavily, saying something unintelligible in that dry, cracking voice. The rain began pounding on the window, patter, 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 as the task force attempted to gain hold of the woman. She resisted their movements, moving around the room while the task force intentionally avoided violent confrontation. The rain grew in its intensity as the woman continued running around her apartment, tripping over her starved cats. Eventually, she fell back onto the window, at which the boards blocking it fell onto the floor, exposing the pouring rain fully. She screamed, as she saw the silhouette of the monster staring at her in every individual raindrop. One drop landed on her skin, and she violently vanished, pulled into a minuscule speck of water. The task force collapsed from exhaustion, perhaps dreading their inevitable amnestic treatment following exposure with an SCP-1128 afflictee. Yet they couldn't help but wonder what the old woman saw in a single speck of water that could cause that degree of fear and paranoia. The kind of fear only caused by entire oceans condensed into a single droplet. Besides the monster, what else did she see in those multitude of droplets? The fish that populated the sea, the whale carcasses left behind by SCP-1128, the sea devils viewed from below, drifting on the water unsuspecting. Just as one may view a grain of sand and see the Sahara, she too saw that raindrop and viewed an ocean entire, along with whatever malevolent creatures inhabit it. One may have more sympathy for the child, reluctant to jump into the pool water, knowing not necessarily that something inhabits that body of water, but that the body belongs to a cycle much larger than itself, larger than any sea or ocean, and the only thing that can traverse that cycle is a monster, a creature like SCP-1128. The task force went back to their local site to report what happened during the incident. Like so many incidents the Foundation deals with, the sum total of those that risk their lives for the greater good is a couple memory-erasing syringes and another update to documentation. A description of SCP-1128 remains in a stuffy locker, lurking in wait among other horrifying stories in the SCP database's sea of terror. Just like that test operator that attempted to best the monster, could the Foundation's attempts ever surmount the possibility of another person being afflicted? Could they conquer the sea? In a member of that task force's dreams, they perceive a dark blue ocean and the distant black shadow that resides within. And from this ocean, they can view the bathtubs, sinks, pools, puddles, cups of water, and rain droplets of the world, seen from below. Although they know not what SCP-1128 looks like, they too experience the fear it summons among those that do, the paranoia, the fear. Although it may not manifest directly in people's lives, it can always be observed, stalking, waiting, lurking under a murky surface, watching with hidden eyes.
It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs. To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The Old Man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the Old Man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the Old Man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the old man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other two observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the old man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the three observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint, crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, two heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms. It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night, because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his six. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike. But to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The two officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The two of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All three observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of two of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world, so hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare if not impossible occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the 2 security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known tried and true method of luring the old man back, tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involved wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
It's the late 90s, and an Air Canada flight experiences severe malfunctions while traveling from London to Vancouver. The pilots are unable to do anything and the plane crashes into the woods of northern Alberta. The crash was devastating. Only 10 of the nearly 300 people on board are alive. And even though they survived the initial disaster, their battle for life has only just begun. It's late autumn in northern Canada, and there's no telling when help will arrive, if at all. If the survivors want to make it through the night, they need to find shelter, and fast. As they trudge through the freezing woods, the group finds a path that looks like it might lead them to civilization. After all, if there was a path in the woods, that meant they were probably in a national park. And if they were in a national park, there had to be a ranger station around somewhere where they could warm up and call for help. They didn't have many other options, so they followed the path which opened up to a clearing. But instead of finding a ranger station or campground, they found something none of them could have expected. It was a pond, but there was something off about it. As they got closer, they saw that this strange pond wasn't filled with water, but blood. The survivors were horrified. That couldn't really be blood, could it? It must have been a weird algae or chemical reaction. But one member of the group, a man named Thomas Dean, who had been on his way back to his hometown of Prince George, British Columbia, thought there was something strangely familiar about this. He remembered being a boy and going to visit family in Alberta, and hearing an urban legend from the older local kids. According to the stories, somewhere out in the wilderness, in the northern part of the province, there was a pond full of human blood. And what made it even worse was that some said the pond was a gateway to hell. The SCP Foundation was also aware of this legend and had been trying to pinpoint the exact source of it for decades prior to the Air Canada crash. They would finally receive definite confirmation of the blood pond when Foundation personnel intercepted a radio transmission from a ranger station located within the Wood Buffalo National Park. It was the survivors of the crash who had managed to make it through the night, and they were about to be escorted out of the park by rangers. The Foundation mobilized quickly to cordon off the pond, as at the time they were unsure of what potentially harmful properties the pond might have had. They set up Watch Station Epsilon 38 and put staff on guard to deter travelers from the area. The pond was given the designation of SCP-354 and classed as Euclid. Foundation scientists made a number of interesting discoveries about SCP-354 when they collected samples for testing. First, the pond was not in fact full of blood, merely an inorganic liquid that closely resembles blood in color and consistency. Second, and even stranger than the red liquid, is that the pond doesn't seem to have any definite banks or a bottom. Instead, the liquid in the pond increases in density as the radius away from the center increases. The liquid congeals at the edges, becoming more solid and blending into the surrounding soil. It also becomes thicker as one descends deeper into the pool, and the bottom of the pond has not yet been reached, if it even exists. Initially, the Foundation found no signs of life within the blood pond, but that would all change at 2:03 p.m. on the day following the opening of Watch Station Epsilon 38. When the science team noticed an unusual level of activity on the pond's surface. Security footage feeds showed a shape rising out of the pond, followed by a deafening shriek. After that, the feed was cut and Foundation lost all communication with Watch Station Epsilon 38. Fearing the worst, a mobile task force was dispatched to the location. When they got there, all personnel at the Watch Station had been killed by what could only be described as a gigantic bat. The task force was able to neutralize the entity, and as soon as they could, the Foundation moved in to increase security around the SCP, creating Area 354 and installing a permanent security detail. After this point, the pond started to regularly spit out a variety of monstrous entities, almost as if it was reacting to the SCP Foundation's increased security measures. After SCP-354-1, the giant bat, came SCP-354-2. 354-2 was an echidna-like monster the size of a bear that was virtually bulletproof but unable to escape Area 354. The Foundation neutralized this anomaly with napalm. SCP-354-3 was a floating black sphere capable of firing deadly beams of concentrated energy. The area's head scientist was able to hit it with a sledgehammer, causing the sphere to malfunction and self-destruct before it was able to escape the area. The Foundation wasn't as lucky with SCP-354-4. This creature was a reptilian humanoid that stood roughly 15 feet tall and was unable to be put down with gunfire. This was the first creature from the pond to successfully escape containment and was only able to be neutralized when the Foundation sent in Mobile Task Force Omega-7, also known as Pandora's Box. The data on pond incursions is partially corrupted, so a complete list of creatures is not available, but some of the other monsters that came out of the blood pond include a killer robot, a set of gigantic tentacles that drag several D-Class personnel into the pond, a pair of panther-like creatures, one made of ice and the other of magma, that ignored Foundation staff and instead fought each other, and one seemingly normal human man who was executed as soon as he emerged from the pond. Tests on his body revealed that he was, in fact, totally normal and would have posed no threat. These anomalies came out of the pond at fairly regular intervals for several months, before the pond went silent for an unprecedented 22 months. The head scientist at the time noted, "I suspect this means one of two things. Either the red pool has died or powered down, or whatever the correct term for it is, or is charging up for something big to come through. O5 believes the former is the most likely explanation, and has recalled 30% of our total personnel and cut 25% of our funding. While I can only hope that they are correct, if the latter situation is true, we're soon to face some terrible monstrosity and we won't have anywhere near the force necessary to deal with it. I worry for all of our safety." His words would prove eerily prophetic following the events of Exploratory Mission 354 Alpha. The Foundation's research and development team built a specialized craft to explore the pond. Because of the strange properties of the pond's density, the craft was essentially made to be both a submarine for parts of the pond where the contents were liquid, and a drill for when the liquid congealed into a semi-solid towards the bottom. The exploration team consisted of Agent Swanson, Agent Turquoise, Agent 86, Dr. J. MacArthur, Chris Simmons, Leroy Tucker, and a pilot named Martin. With the team assembled, the ship was sent down into the pond. Nothing eventful happened for the first 2 days of the mission, but at 4:30 a.m. on the third day, gravity suddenly reversed for the crew of the ship. This seemed to indicate that they were approaching the halfway point, though what would be on the other side, nobody could say. On the fourth day, the ship surfaced, proving definitely that the pond was in fact some sort of portal. The crew looked out of the portholes to see the darkness of night above them. While sensors outside the ship detected nothing harmful in the atmosphere around them, the crew were wary of exiting the craft. The other side of the pond was nothing like the world the crew knew. For one thing, the night lasted for 28 hours before dawn came, and when the sun finally rose, it was much larger and redder than the Earth's sun. Under the light of the strange red star, the crew could see that the pond on this side was massive compared to what they've come into, more like a large lake. Surrounding the lake was sand and rocks that were covered in a kind of moss that disappeared under sunlight and regrew during the night. The team left the ship and started to explore. During their time in this strange world, they found that the day lasted just a few hours shorter than the night, meaning that whatever planet they were on had a roughly 43-hour-long rotation as opposed to our own planet's 24. The team found a number of anomalous elements on their expedition, including razor-sharp grass that can puncture skin and streams of liquid carbon dioxide. They heard some loud roars in the distance once or twice, but other than that, the planet was eerily silent, with seemingly no animal life and not even wind. When it rained, the soil remained dry, and based on that, the scientists theorized the plants in this world were more efficient at absorbing moisture. On the 25th day, the team ran into a huge metal wall that appeared to be artificially constructed. Luckily, Leroy Tucker, a quick-thinking researcher, was able to rig a blowtorch from camping supplies and melt a hole through the metal. On the other side, there was finally wind and odd black grass. That's the extent of what is known about the other side of the wall, because the expedition logs are heavily corrupted after that point. But we know that whatever was in there wasn't good, because the team never returned. Strangely, there's no record of any names mentioned in the ship's log, almost as if being killed on the other side completely erased them from history. No other expeditions into the pond were launched after that. On an undisclosed date, a year following the discovery of the Blood Pond and construction of Area 354, the site was completely evacuated, and power was cut to the area. Mobile Task Force Data 12 was dispatched to investigate the cause of the evacuation, but before contact could be established, the area's on-site nuclear warhead was detonated, completely destroying the site. MTF Data 12 was then attacked by a convoy made up of D-Class and other low-ranking staff who had evacuated Area 354. It was apparent that there had been some kind of mutiny within the site, and that a dissolution of the chain of command had led to its evacuation and destruction. The convoy totally annihilated MTF Data 12, and no further contact with the former personnel of Area 354 has been made since. Following the site's detonation, a new site was constructed called simply the Red Pool Containment Site. Unlike the previous facility, which focused on research and neutralization, the new site is entirely concerned with containment. The shift in directive came as a response to the pond's apparent reactive nature. Each creature that emerged from the pond seemed to be in retaliation to the Foundation's actions, and it was theorized by some that the mutiny at Area 354 was triggered by some kind of psychic attack from the pond itself. An interview in the SCP file on 354 reveals that there was one more disastrous attempt to control and understand the Blood Pond. According to an interview with a Foundation agent, the head doctor proposed a scheme to drain the Blood Pond using a system of pumps and hoses. All non-essential personnel were evacuated in case case of emergency, leaving only the pump technicians, D-class personnel, and a few agents for security. However, as soon as the pump was scheduled to be turned on, everyone at the site experienced a mass dissociative episode. The agent described the feeling they all experienced as like being in a dream and suddenly realizing that you're asleep. He said, "Everything stopped being real. It was like we had to escape right now." When asked what happened when the pump was turned on, he simply explained that it wouldn't let them. This interview confirmed the theory that the pond is not only capable of releasing monsters out into our world, but also that it's capable of powerful but much more subtle psychological attacks. This suggests a chilling possibility that the pond isn't just blindly reacting to being attacked, but it's fully sentient, and the actions of the SCP Foundation have only served to annoy it. And worst, studies of the pond's banks have proved evidence that the area of congealed liquid around the perimeter of the pond has been steadily expanding. That's right, the pond is getting bigger. The last thing the Foundation agent stationed at the site said before being dragged out of the interview and sedated was, "It gets bigger and stronger every day, and now we've made it angry." One of the primary aims of the SCP Foundation is to contain the anomalies that they discover. Secure, contain, protect is their mission statement after all. However, there are some forces so unknowable and malevolent that there is no way to truly contain them. SCP-4205 is one such force. Very little is known about SCP-4205, even compared to other SCPs, many of which are mysterious by their very nature. We do not know what it is, we do not know what it wants, and we do not have any meaningful way to stop it. The best that can be done to protect yourself from it is to implement the few known preventative measures available and pray that it doesn't set its sights on you. The little information that exists on SCP-4205 was recorded by Wade Dalitz, a former junior researcher at the Foundation. He wrote the initial report on SCP-4205 on a computer, Terminal 4. Though his work was highly valuable and provided many previously unknown insights about the nature of the SCP, sadly his knowledge could not save him. The official entry on SCP-4205 was his final act before his death on December 11th, 1992. Before we get deeper into that entry and Wade's final day on Earth, it's important to understand what SCP-4205 is, or at least understand the little we know about what it is. 4205 is a Keter-class SCP, meaning that it's incredibly difficult or complicated to contain. It also shows extreme hostility toward all life. It is described as an amber-colored pair of human-like eyes, with the ability to appear spontaneously in windows, mirrors, or any other glass or glass-like surface. One of the reasons so little is known about these eyes is that anyone who sees them dies within seconds. Much like the mythical basilisk, the gaze of SCP-4205 is deadly and inescapable. The eyes only seem to appear to people who are alone in a room, and never in places where there's more than one person. But aside from that, there is no way to predict where the eyes will appear. Since it is unknown if the eyes are part of a corporeal body or even present on this plane of reality, there is no way to contain them or stop them from killing. This brings us to that fateful day, December 11th, 1992. The day that the SCP Foundation would finally be given some tangible information on the mysterious amber eyes, at the cost of one of their researchers' lives. Wade Dalitz, a young man fresh out of his university studies, was brought on board as a junior researcher by Dr. Mark Forsyth, a senior researcher. Dr. Forsyth recruited Wade after giving a guest lecture at his university, and being impressed by Wade's keen observational skills, thirst for knowledge of the unexplained, and determination to understand that which seemed to defy explanation. After Wade graduated, he was recruited by Dr. Forsyth and given the position of junior researcher at the SCP Foundation, where he assisted Dr. Forsyth, now a site supervisor, in his research. After several months of working under Dr. Forsyth with minimal responsibilities, Wade was finally given the opportunity to write his first SCP report on SCP-4205. Following some initial documented appearances of 4205, Dr. Forsyth approved further research into the anomaly, with Wade appointed as the lead researcher on the subject. According to Wade's entry, he was responsible for the discovery of SCP-4205 when he spotted the anomaly in a window. Though later reviews of security footage determined that he was not the first person to observe the eyes, he did claim to be the first to observe them and live to tell the tale. In his writing on the subject, Wade is puzzled by the fact that he survived his encounter with SCP-4205 and wonders what could have set him apart from the others that fell victim to its gaze. He found himself frustrated as he documented SCP-4205, his rough drafts of reports dissolving into angry rants about his own incompetence. Wayne had difficulty adjusting to his new responsibilities, especially with the added element of his assigned subject's mysterious and volatile nature. In between his reports on SCP-4205, its previous appearances, and its effects on its victims, he wrote letters to his father, desperate for reassurance that he was not messing everything up, letters that would sadly go unsent. In his coverage of SCP-4205, Wade made note of a troubling recurring element in each victim's death. When medical professionals attempted to revive the victims, it was always noted that their brain activity stopped much more quickly than in cases of death by natural causes. When examined, all aspects of the body aside from the brain were completely unharmed. The brain, however, showed massive nerve damage in the amygdala, hippocampus, medial temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. The appearance of this brain trauma had been compared to the effects of electrical shock or a severe head injury. In addition to Wade, 6 other people on record encountered SCP-4205. Every encounter ended the same way, with sudden brain death and severe nerve damage immediately after viewing the eyes in a reflective surface. The first encounter occurred on January 5, 1990, when Deputy Liaison Genna viewed the eyes in a reflective glass one-way window. Security tape reveals that the eyes appeared in the window 8 minutes before the Deputy Liaison spotted them. As soon as he did, he fell from his chair and immediately died. Though the specifics varied from case to case, the end result of every encounter was the same, with none surviving long enough to relate what they had experienced, every encounter except Wade's. As he continued his documentation of SCP-4205, Wade's mental state quickly began to deteriorate, the process of his mind coming apart, and his thoughts giving way to confusion, fear, and anger at his own survival is documented in his reports on the SCP. He agonized over the questions of why he was able to survive gazing into the eyes of SCP-4205 when so many others had not. The question consumed him until he was unable to eat, sleep, or do anything but obsess over the SCP he was tasked with researching. As he became more agitated, he began to write about the eyes appearing to him again. On one occurrence, he attempted to touch them, and described the sensation like touching a balloon to your arm after it had been charged with static electricity. He continued to report seeing the eyes. The worst was when trying to sleep, during which he was overtaken by violent sleep paralysis and plagued with visions of the amber eyes. The only comfort Wade seemed to find was in memories of his loved ones. He wrote about his mother and his father, even as their memories grew foggier to him. He also mentioned a man by the name of Theodore Quayle, who he claimed was a researcher at the Foundation. Later fact-checking determined that this was not the case, and that Quayle must have been someone from Wade's past. He wrote about Quayle wistfully, mournfully, with words of love and loss, tormented by the sense that he was losing his grip on reality and everything he once held dear. As Wade descended deeper into a hell inside his own mind, he continued to mull over the questions of SCP-4205. Was there more to it than what was visible? Did it have a body? Why had he survived the encounter with it? And what did it want from him? He decided that those who had perished immediately were the lucky ones. They had escaped the torture that had overtaken his life. The eyes were everywhere now, watching him even as he attempted to unlock their secrets on a Foundation computer. He spoke to the eyes at one point, but refused to write down what they said to him. His last entry, his last thought, was a plea for Theodore Quayle's embrace. There is no more written about the research or about the eyes, only a simple, desperate need for a comfort that is long lost. Now is the part of our story where terror meets tragedy. Contrary to what Wade thought, and what was recorded in his final computer entries, he did not survive his brief brush with SCP-4205. The truth is that he spotted the amber eyes in the glass above his terminal monitor while recording the entry and died seconds later. Though his death was swift, it felt agonizingly slow, as revealed by his descent into panic and paranoia recorded in his writings. The entries recorded as a result of the connection Wade and the computer, his physical contact with it at the moment of exposure to SCP-4205's anomalous effects, allowing the terminal to archive his final thoughts before he succumbed to the deadly nature of the eyes. The entries were never physically typed, but rather jumped from his dying mind into the mainframe. His entries, the echoes of a dying mind, offer a glimpse into the way that SCP-4205 kills its victims. In the seconds leading up to death, the amber eyes fast-forward a person's mind, feeding on the electrical impulses that it gives off as it speeds through what seems to be days of fear and of a loosening grip on reality. The death may be swift, but the suffering is long. Wade left the Foundation with a digital fingerprint, an echo of the person he was at his core, in addition to his experiences with SCP-4205 itself. Wade spent his final moments terrified for his life, dreaming of a father that he missed and a long-lost love from his college days. His sacrifice must not be forgotten, because no one ever survives an encounter with SCP-4205. His documented final moments are the only first-hand account in existence. Junior researcher Wade Dalitz gave us a gift in death. He allowed the SCP Foundation a glimpse into the true horror of the amber eyes and a reminder of what they are capable of stealing from us. So be careful of windows, mirrors, screens, and all reflective surfaces. When you look into them, you never know what you might see looking back. The year is 1941. And the world is gripped by the most violent and widespread war in history. Millions march to war as bloody battles are fought across the globe. Horrendous atrocities are carried out on groups of people, and parts of London are bombed to rubble on a weekly basis. Considering it's only been 20 years since the last World War, it must seem to the early residents of the early 20th century that the world is coming apart at the seams. And amongst the chaos, it'd be easy not to notice a secluded manor house in the English countryside disappearing without a trace for 11 days, before suddenly returning to our reality. But thankfully, one organization makes it its sole duty to notice the unnoticeable and understand the impossible: the SCP Foundation. And within that anomalous manor house, Foundation agents and researchers were about to find horrors beyond even their darkest imaginations. This is the grim tale of SCP-1461, better known as the House of the Worm. When the manor house reappeared after its 11-day absence, the Foundation zeroed in, sending agents inside to investigate. It was a 2-level dwelling complete with 12 bedrooms, 4 baths, 3 studies, a main foyer/ballroom, a library, a kitchen, and a pantry basement. The Foundation observed that a number of these rooms had been fitted with rows of bunk beds, similar to a boarding house or barracks. Only later would they understand why. They found that the upper portion of the home exhibited no abnormal qualities whatsoever, but as the agents investigated further, they found an entrance to the truly anomalous portion of the manor, the extensive sub-level system. No previous records of the building kept by the local council indicated that there would be anything below the manor's basement, so either the mysterious previous occupants, who were nowhere to be found, had built this sub-level, or had just appeared here on its own. Regardless of which was the case, agents and researchers knew that whatever had happened down here had everything to do with the manor's mysterious disappearance. They descended into the depths of what seemed like a man-made cave system, constructed primarily from a mix of concrete, iron, and brass. It was a behemoth of 20th century technology, intricate snaking systems of pipes, gears, and pumping pistons. It was like someone had built an entire factory down here. But for what? The agents began to spread out through the labyrinthian bowels of the manor, hoping to find some answers. But all they seemed to discover was more questions. This place hadn't been built with any form of comprehensible logic. It was full of dead ends, stairways that ascended and descended to nowhere, doors that would open to reveal just walls behind them or not open at all. It was like a maze built by a maniac. It didn't help that it looked like the place was recently hit by an earthquake, with some passages caved in and mangled machinery strewn about. It seemed that no human workers had interfered with the impossibly complex and bizarre machinery in quite some time. A number of the materials used to construct said machinery, as well as the gray sandstone filling in the collapsed passageways, remain unidentified to this day. Already, the sublevel was proving to be a complex puzzle box with only an estimated 75% of its layout ultimately being mapped by Foundation researchers. However, they would soon realize that this place wasn't just confusing, it was deadly. The only method of self-maintenance detected by the exploring agents were pipes that would fire a thick black lubricant onto the surrounding machinery. One of the Foundation agents had the misfortune of getting covered in it while exploring a darkened passageway, and 80% of his body was melted as a result. It appeared that the viscous black goo was incredibly corrosive to all organic matter. A number of the machines also emitted dangerously high quantities of gamma and X-ray radiation, making it difficult to explore many of the caverns without heavy hazmat protection. And worst of all, were the extremely hostile creatures living in the caves who would regularly attack Foundation personnel. These abominations came to be known as SCP-1461-1, vicious steampunk Frankenstein monsters, once human, but with large parts of their bodies replaced by crude mechanical implants, including metal teeth and claws. 1461-1s have displayed a taste for human flesh, and they have dragged multiple Foundation agents down into their lair to be converted into monsters like them. It's believed that SCP-1461 is capable of controlling these beasts through the strategic use of sound from its brass-speaking pipes, leading them into areas where Foundation personnel are present to instigate conflict. Many of these pitiful creatures have had their throats replaced by phonographs, endlessly repeating the same nonsense phrases over and over again. I am what you have made me. I am choice, and I am tyranny. Forgive me. I am then, and I am now. What gods they will be then. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am the trap. I am beauty, and I am chaos. Children are selfish. I am the worm. I have broken God. Still, in spite of the mazes, monsters, and deadly chemicals, the agents persisted and managed to discover several important locations. The gel production chamber on sublevel 3 creates glass jars from the unidentified sandstone and fills them with a slime that looks to contain living eyes and teeth. The factory deliveries room is filled with a huge number of crates and boxes, which seem to shift and change in number between Foundation patrols. The speaking tube room on sublevel 11 contains a grand pulpit that acts as the connecting point for the complex array of speaking tubes running through the entire cave system. The body parts of a deceased female also appear to be wired into the machinery, like spare parts. And on sublevel 12, they found the so-called catalyst room. Here they discovered a huge, complicated, clockwork and steam-powered machine that appeared to be broken and missing some parts. Most horrifying of all, though, is the raised platform in the center of the catalyst room, on top of which is a metal hospital bed. A desiccated male corpse rests upon the bed, its chest punctured by large syringes connected by tubes to some kind of pumping machine. The parts connecting this pumping machine to the overall apparatus of the room were missing though, leaving its purpose a mystery. The Foundation assumed that fluids used to be drawn out of this corpse to somehow power the machine. You may be starting to worry that there doesn't seem to be any answers here, that this house is one big mystery. But lucky for you, you're wrong. An old journal was also discovered in the catalyst room, and if what was written inside is to be believed, then we may finally have some truth about who created the House of the Worm, why it was created, and what horrible events triggered its mysterious disappearance and reappearance. His true name has been redacted by the Foundation, and special efforts have been made to maintain secrecy around the house, seeing as it's an anomaly of great interest to a cult known as the Church of the Broken God. So we'll just call the one who made this place the inventor. Before any of this, the inventor was one of the many Englishmen traumatized and almost killed in the horrific trench battles of World War I. After a near-death experience, the inventor, like many geniuses and madmen, was plagued by surreal and nightmarish visions. He saw a huge creature that he referred to as the Worm, a gigantic metal monstrosity with dragon-like jaws full of gnashing gears that rampaged through Europe, destroying and devouring everything in its path. These apocalyptic visions also presented him with a solution, vague blueprints for a machine that might be the salvation of him and others willing to take his new gospel to heart. an escape from a world that the inventor knew in his heart was about to end. He hired work-starved laborers from across the country to help him make his visions a reality, and began a massive secret construction project beneath his isolated country manor house. For the inventor, it was all a labor of love. He wanted to protect his wife, son, and daughter from the terrible jaws of the worm. But as the project stretched on, his wife began to suspect that he'd lost his mind. Many of his workers, however, felt just the opposite. They became infatuated by the inventor's sermons on the nature of the worm and the coming apocalypse they hoped to escape. Soon enough, they had become a bona fide cult, constructing the elaborate sublevels underneath the house in preparation for the fast-approaching day of reckoning. Then came World War II. The inventor saw Hitler, hungry for war, as one of the avatars of the worm. Finally, knowing that the time was right, he activated the machine and successfully trapped the worm in the bowels of his mechanized home. However, as the Blitz raged and London's bombing began, the inventor felt as though he hadn't stopped anything. He realized once and for all that he was never meant to stop the apocalypse, only escape it. And by throwing the final switch and setting the machine he and his followers had built into overdrive, he did just that. This was the moment that the House of the Worm disappeared, transporting the inventor, his family, and his devoted staff to a different world. An empty gray world, devoid of war but also lacking all the comforts of regular life, including food. Things went downhill from there, as their supplies quickly began to run out, and the cult descended into cannibalism in order to survive. Things weren't going much better in the inventor's personal life. His wife, fearing what would happen to the family, took her own life and the life of his daughter. Though by this point, the inventor's mind was so fractured that it's possible he may have killed them himself. Either way, it was only the inventor and his son left, and more trouble was brewing. Eudora, one of the staff trapped in the building with the inventor and his cult, started a mutiny. She claimed the worm spoke to her from below, and that their only path to salvation was pleasing the worm. How would they please it? A sacrifice, of course. They would give it the son of the man who had trapped it. The mutineers took the inventor's only remaining child and descended into the lowest sublevels. The inventor followed, hoping to track them down, save his son, and salvage something from this nightmare. As he ventured deeper, battling the members of Eudora's new cult, he found that they were changing themselves, becoming the half-human cyborg creatures that the Foundation would later discover. The inventor would find Eudora herself in the speaking tube room. Her body, still living, was wired into the machinery, and she had sacrificed his son to the worm. In a rage, the inventor murdered Eudora, or whatever was left of her, then heard a familiar voice speaking out of a nearby speaking tube. It said, "I am what you have made me. I am then, and I am now. I am choice, and I am tyranny. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am beauty, and I am chaos. I am the worm." The voice was his own. In that terrible moment, the inventor realized that the worm wasn't a giant all-devouring monster. It was him. In trying to protect his loved one from a perceived apocalypse, he'd brought them all to their horrible demise. He'd trapped them with the monster he'd hoped for them all to escape from, because no matter what you build, you can't escape from who you are. Grief-stricken and broken, the inventor descended into the catalyst room. There was his son, stuck with the syringes, drained of all life to fuel the mighty machine his father had created. In his last moments, the inventor decided to do the only noble thing. He threw himself into the machine, destroying both it and himself in the process. The house was transported back to our own reality, but the worm, in a sense, was no more. But who knows if the worm is really dead? Its thoughts and poisonous intent still lingers in the caverns and rattles through the speaking pipes. Whatever really happened, the Foundation is still picking up the pieces today, and who knows what lurks in the parts still hidden from our knowledge. We've all heard of the Led Zeppelin song Stairway to Heaven, a title that invokes the image of a stairway leading up to a land of peace and paradise. But where else could a stairway lead? To a dusty attic full of old photo albums? To the upper level of a mall where the movie theater and frozen yogurt shop are neatly situated? Perhaps it leads to a rooftop with a beautiful view. Or maybe Just maybe, a staircase could lead you to SCP-2427. SCP-2427, appropriately nicknamed a thing full of stuff, is an extra-dimensional area filled with a variety of unusual and anomalous objects. SCP-2427 can be accessed by way of a broken stone staircase located in rural Ohio. According to local legend, carrying a sprig of hemlock up the broken stairs will allow a person to emerge into a mysterious grass clearing that appears to be in a forest somewhere in the United States. No matter what time a person ascends the staircase, the solar time in the clearing will always be 2 p.m. You know how people say it's 5 o'clock somewhere? Well, it's 2 o'clock somewhere too, and that somewhere is here. The pocket dimension that is SCP-2427 is thought to have been a holding area for weapons, prisoners, and artifacts belonging to an ancient cult known as the Brazen Heart. Little is known about this relatively obscure cult, other than the fact that they worship the demonic entity Moloch, a known enthusiast of violent human sacrifice, and were previously thought to have been eradicated during the Spanish Inquisition. The existence of SCP-2427 suggests that they are very much not eradicated, and are still active. They refer to these holding areas as attics, and though no confirmed members of the Brazen Heart have been contacted, it is considered possible that there are at least a handful of other attics hidden around the world. The Foundation has identified 7 anomalous objects inside of SCP-2427 so far, each strange in its own beautiful, though often terrible way. Like snowflakes, if they were capable of killing or maiming you. The first object in SCP-2427, aka SCP-2427-1, is a seemingly normal fire hydrant. However, if you think there's anything normal about the items found here, then you haven't been paying attention. The hydrant is made out of lead, and when opened, it expels high levels of ionized radiation. No specific measurements of the radiation have been taken yet, but it is definitely hazardous to human health. One unfortunate member of D-Class personnel has proven that it is a high enough level to melt human flesh. Sorry about your face, Dave. The hydrant is currently contained within an electrified perimeter and is not to be opened under any circumstances to prevent any further flesh melting. The last thing we need is another Dave incident. The second object contained within SCP-2427 or SCP-2427-2 is not actually an object at all. It's a building. Only on number 2 and we're already throwing curveballs at you. Trust no one. Surprises lurk around every corner. This particular building resembles a large multi-storied sanitarium built in the 1860s. Though it is clear from the outside that the building has or should have multiple stories, the inside is a different matter. Past the building's front doors is a non-Euclidean space consisting of a single floor and 3 sparsely decorated rooms with one central foyer. The first room is the holding place for SCP-2427-3. The second contains SCP-2427-4, and the third room contains nothing except scattered religious documents, bottled water, and a selection of canned food. No unauthorized staff are permitted to enter the building, in order to minimize complications or potential employee casualties. The first 2 anomalies on this list are hardly even strange by SCP Foundation's standards. Sure, the hydrant can melt your face, and the building defies the laws of physics and space, but that's just a regular Tuesday around these parts. Been there, seen that. What else you got? Well, SCP-2427-3 is where things really get strange. If you're wandering through the bowels of SCP-2427-2 and you make a wrong turn into the first room, you will find yourself face to face with a startling sight. This entity is a combination of electronic circuitry, a cow's digestive tract, the hairless head of a human man, a hat rack, several lengths of garden hose, and an unidentified crystalline structure. This creature is extraordinarily fast and strong, exhibiting carnivorous tendencies and a very strong point of view on the world around it. Lucky for us, it is capable of speech and is able to tell us just what it thinks. Though this monstrosity doesn't have much of a right to pass judgment on anyone, cow intestine, body and all, it has expressed a violent hatred of all life that it considers impure. Anyone who encounters SCP-2427-3 experiences an overwhelming desire to submit themselves for judgment. allowing the creature to determine their purity. There is a rumor that if one is judged to be pure, they will have a wish granted. If they are deemed impure, however, they will be devoured alive. If you're tempted to introduce yourself to the creature, your odds are not especially great. The creature has not encountered a single pure being yet. In order to protect the Foundation staff working in its vicinity, the entrance to SCP-2427-3's room has been sealed off with a reinforced steel door, and the windows have been paved over with concrete. Armed guards are watching the entrance at all times. The creature must be fed 1 live goat per day in order to keep its appetite satiated. The Foundation's goat budget is through the roof these days, but it's worth it to keep the thing contained. Better to spend money on goats now and not spend money on cannibalized personnel later. SCP-2427-4 consists not of an object located within a room, but the room itself. The room, which contains no furniture and a linoleum floor, has a peculiar effect on the human psyche. Once a person steps foot into the room, they lose consciousness for 5 minutes. During this time, they will speak freely, listing off a variety of negative qualities about themselves. Once they wake up, they have no memory of entering this state or anything that they said during it. It's cheaper than therapy, right? But it's also much weirder and less effective, so you get what you pay for in the end. A member of D-Class personnel who was observed inside of the room waxed poetic about his personal failings, beginning his monologue with, "My soul is a den of spiders," and ending it with, "O hero, whence I awaken, hesitate not to feed my flesh and my soul to the judge beast." Somebody give this guy a hug, because the room seems to have no adverse effects on human test subjects except for causing everyone who hears their monologue a bit of discomfort. There are no containment procedures in effect for it at this time. We've had rooms, fire hydrants, and horrible meat-robot hybrids, and now you can't even trust the clouds in the sky. SCP-2427-5 is a seemingly innocent cloud, hovering stationary over the building. When looked at by a human for more than 3 seconds, the cloud will eject a ball of solid lead towards the person at a supersonic speed. That's right, folks. This cloud can and will shoot you. It hates being observed, but it also hates when you try to leave the perimeter. It will attack any person attempting to leave by firing the same lead ball at them. So far, 14 personnel have been killed by this highly aggressive cloud. And some people still think thunderstorms and hail are the worst things clouds have to offer. So naive. As it is a literal cloud, there is no way to contain it, so no people in the vicinity of the cloud are permitted to look at it for more than 3 seconds at a time. SCP-2427-6 is a series of 18 small trees, spread throughout the instance of SCP-2427. Above ground, the trees look normal, though their species has proven surprisingly difficult to determine. From an external perspective, they are simply ordinary trees. However, radar analysis revealed that the roots of these trees are deeply strange. Instead of the usual twisting tree roots, the ground below these trees contains a mass in the shape of a human body. Much to the disgust of the observing researchers, these humanoid masses occasionally twitch and move, as if alive. The trees themselves appear to be growing from the crotch area of each humanoid figure. How's that for morning wood? I know, I get it, bad joke. This arrangement between tree and person seems to be some kind of punishment, as each tree is marked with a plaque reading, "The lecherous suffer what they must, and it is beautiful." Until it can be certain that the condition of these human roots is not contagious, these trees are to be treated as potential biohazards and isolated in individual containers. The final object in SCP-2427 currently categorized by the Foundation is SCP-2427-7. SCP-2427-7 is a pile of ashes and wood located just behind a posted sign that reads, "The Liar's Cradle." Extensive testing has been established that the Liar's Cradle was almost certainly used as a torture device in interrogations performed by the Brazen Heart. A person standing within the boundaries of the cradle, which encompasses the aforementioned circle of wood and ashes, is unable to lie without suffering the consequences. Namely, they will be set on fire. The nature of how exactly the Liar's Cradle works is not certain, and more research needs to be done on it. However, this much is known for sure. It contains no sentient intelligence. It is not aware of what it is doing. It does not kill its victims, rather it keeps them miraculously alive as it sets them on fire, prolonging their agony and allowing their interrogators to get the truth out of them. A series of experiments revealed that it only immolates a person who is knowingly lying. D-class personnel give demonstrably false information to repeat in the cradle without knowledge of its falsehood were not set on fire. However, when those same D-class personnel knowingly lied in the boundaries, they immediately were set ablaze. It is almost certain that the Brazen Heart cult used the cradle as a method of interrogating presumed liars in their midst. Further investigation will likely reveal human remains beneath the cradle itself, though this is just a hypothesis currently. But come on, there has to be some bones somewhere beneath something as ominous as the liar's cradle. Though they have only identified 7 anomalies inside SCP-2427 at the moment, there are plenty more lurking in there, waiting to be discovered. In the foyer of SCP-2427-2, the Foundation discovered an extremely ominous list of items, clearly belonging to members of the Cult of the Brazen Heart. This list included some familiar items, such as pilgrim provisions, also known as the canned beans and soup found in SCP-2427-2, a Level 3 Purity Proctor, a purge engine disguised as a fire hydrant, and the Liar's Cradle. However, it also contained many things that have not yet been discovered, such as 1 slaughtering perseverance, 27 pyre children, 3 ascended cultivars, 7 supreme angelics, 9 dragons, and the Brazen Heart itself. Dr. Gordon McElroy, Site Director of Area 2427, put out a memo to all Level 4 and higher staff assigned to the area after the discovery of this list. Understandably, he was most concerned about the supreme angelics and the dragons, particularly the latter. The cult, as most cults are, is fond of deliberately obscure language, but you don't want to rule out the possibility they've got a fire-breathing lizard or 2 stashed away. In the meantime, as the Foundation is working to better understand the contents of SCP-2427, the area has been sealed off to the public. A 500-meter perimeter has been established around its entrance, and a fake private country club has been set up as a front. It's only a matter of time before the rest of the anomalies on the list are discovered, and this thing full of stuff gets even fuller of even more stuff. Let's just hope none of it ever gets out, because if there are more of these addicts out there, who knows what else the Brazen Heart is hiding? Their little cult may not be as extinct as we thought. You're on a road trip, the kind that stretches over days on end, and you need to make multiple stops along the way to refuel the car and yourself. The last time you remember stopping to get more gas and a bite to eat was back in Wyoming, and now you're in the heart of Montana. Thankfully, like an oasis in the desert, you see the town of Clearwater off in the distance. It's a vibrant, welcoming little place, a perfect slice of classic small-town Americana. You took a similar trip last year, and vaguely remember stopping at Clearwater that time too, and you're glad to be back. In particular, you remember the Old Prairie Diner, a folksy little place with the most delicious huckleberry pie you ever tasted. Perhaps it's about time for you to give it another try. You fill up your tank and stop at the diner. The food tastes just as good as you remember, but one thing is off. The entire staff seems to have changed. It is the exact same diner you ate at a year ago, no doubt about that, but it looks like everyone from the waitstaff to the cashier to the cooks have all been replaced. You try your best not to think about it. After all, businesses are allowed to replace their staff, but the longer you sit in the diner, the more uncomfortable the feelings become. You need to ask someone, just to push away the fears that you're not going crazy. When the waiter passes by, you compliment the food and mention you ate here last year too. You asked the unfamiliar waiter if they had worked here back then. They confirm that yes, they've always worked here, and so has everybody else. The diner is a family business. You leave town not too long after that, feeling vaguely unsettled. And as a voice on the radio warns about the incoming rain, you tell yourself that you never want to return to the town of Clearwater, Montana. As you leave, the memory of the town seems to fade from your mind in real time. But little do you know, the people of Clearwater will never be able to leave, ever. It's because something horrifying will happen in Clearwater every single year. and that thing is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3300. This annual anomalous event is Clearwater's own local curse, always occurring around mid-June. While many of the mechanics of this event still elude the Foundation's understanding, the outcome is well documented. Every single inhabitant of the town is replaced by a person who didn't previously exist. While some elements may carry over from their original counterparts, every person involved will simply be a whole new person, with no memories of the change or who they once were. The process known as SCP-3300 lasts between 6 and 18 days, and once the process has begun, it's impossible for any outsiders to intervene. It begins with rain, a light, dreary drizzle at first, but each day the rain gets worse. Soon it's a storm, and then a maelstrom. Flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, all centered around Clearwater but cutting off neatly just beyond it. What happens in Clearwater remains in Clearwater, and when the process has concluded and the sun shines once more, everybody has been changed. Whenever the Foundation has tried to send personnel or equipment into Clearwater during SCP-3300, one of two things has happened. In the more favorable scenarios, those attempting to enter Clearwater have simply appeared on the other side of the city limits. In the less positive instances, personnel and equipment have been lost forever within. There is no stopping or even understanding SCP-3300. According to Foundation records, Clearwater has been around at least as long as the Foundation itself, perhaps even longer. Clearwater has been able to undergo its yearly nightmare without intrusion due to a unique cognitohazardous effect, which creates a kind of mental block around memories of the town for outsiders. You won't forget Clearwater per se, but you will find it increasingly hard to focus on, like something you can only ever see out of the corner of your eye. There is no saving the people of Clearwater. The horror will play out again and again and again. The Foundation has no first-hand knowledge of what happens in Clearwater during those horrifying 18 days, but one account they have hints at a terrifying possibility. During an excursion into Clearwater, the Foundation managed to collect a diary belonging to a woman named Margaret Lane. To the best of our knowledge, Margaret Lane no longer exists. But if the contents of her diary aren't to be believed, then what goes on in Clearwater during SCP-3300 is far worse than we ever imagined. Margaret first started her diary not long before SCP-3300's 1995 iteration began. She was in the middle of a tumultuous time in her life. Freshly clean from alcohol and drug addiction, forced to live with her antagonistic mother, and having peculiar and distressing dreams. In the first dream Margaret recorded, she was someone else. A woman living in a small hut perhaps a century ago or more. It was plague time. She was looking down upon her daughter, bedridden, her skin covered in painful-looking red blotches. Her husband was already dead. That's when another man enters, a healthy man. He tells her that he's found their salvation, and then the dream ended. Margaret woke up to a gray, dreary day. There were clouds on the horizon. The rain was coming. It drizzled for the next few days before getting more intense, as one would expect from an SCP-3300 cycle. Of course, nothing seemed out of place to Margaret. Life carried on. She continued to stay clean, resisting the offers of her old dealer, though her relationship with her mother remained frosty. The rain started to get worse as voices on the radio insisted that conditions would continue to become more severe over the next few days. They tried their best to maintain normality. Margaret invited some friends, Jared, Sam, Mike, and Isabel, to come over and play D&D at her place. That was when all hell broke loose. While the group roleplayed, there was a furious banging at the door, like whoever was knocking was trying to bash the door down. When Margaret's mom opened the door to investigate the commotion, she saw that an entire family was standing there, a father, a mother, and 2 young children. The father immediately began furiously asking why all these strangers were in his house. When Margaret's mother tried to tell him that this wasn't his house, he became increasingly agitated and walked straight into the home. Margaret's friends attempted to subdue him, but he threw them off, displaying a supernatural strength. Margaret's mom ran in with a golf club and struck the mysterious man in the chest. There was a nasty splat, but he didn't seem to react. The golf club was just embedded in his chest, having broken the skin and sunken in, but there was no blood, just dripping water. The father then pulled the golf club out of his chest and began beating Margaret's mother to death with it, all while repeating "my house" again and again, while his wife and children watched with broad, sunny smiles in the rain. Somehow Margaret knew that her mother was beyond saving, and that there was no way of defeating these things in a physical confrontation. All they could do was run out to Jared's van with the rest of the group and hightail it to the police station. But when they arrived at the station, the doors were barred and it appeared empty. As the torrential rain hammered down from above, there was nothing left to do but drive out of town and try to escape whatever madness was going on here. But that was easier said than done. They drove for what seemed like hours on end as the rain and the howling wind persisted. Jared had been injured during the fight with the strange family, and his health deteriorated further as the drive stretched on. They should have left the town of Clearwater a long time ago, but it seemed like they were nowhere. It wasn't long before Jared was lying dead in the back of the van, and now there were only 4 of them left. They kept driving, afraid, grieving, hungry, and tired, and Margaret took the opportunity to sleep. It was no time to rest, but she was so exhausted that she had no choice. Margaret had a continuation of her earlier dream. The different her, the dream her, was laying the plague-ridden body of her daughter in the river, but she wasn't the only one. All the villages of her settlement were placing the bodies of their dead in the river as the water washed around them and through them. The bodies became one with the water, and then they became the water. The water was everything. When Margaret awoke, it was to the horrifying sounds of bubbling and boiling. That's when she saw that Jared's body was dissolving. No, not dissolving, evaporating. It was bubbling and convulsing like it was made of water until the entire thing burst into a cascade of hot steam. After that, Margaret and the others left the vehicle and refused to get back inside. Nothing was making sense. It was like something out of a nightmare. As they walked, the rain hammered down upon them. They couldn't have been walking for more than a mile when they crashed into something. It was a sign, "Welcome to Clearwater." It was like that the town itself had drawn them back. Mike refused to return to the town of his own free will and began walking in the other direction. Moments later, he was walking back towards them in silence, though he never intended to. SCP-3300 had distorted his path and brought him back. It was clear that Mike was shaken to the core by the experience, but they had to press on. They would head to the grocery store for food, and then to a sporting goods store where they could hopefully grab some guns to fight the violent, altered people who'd somehow appeared with the rain. But things didn't go to plan, or what little plan there even was. Mike shot himself on the first night at Dirk's Sporting Goods, leaving only Margaret, Sam, and Isabel alive. Perhaps one of the most terrifying details of Mike's death was the fact he didn't even bleed. Instead, the gaping exit wound in the back of his head was just full of water. Water was all that seemed to be left of them. Sam, seemingly driven to the edge by the sight of Mike's death, grabbed a hunting knife to perform an experiment. She'd cut it into her own skin, and was horrified to see only water dripping out. They'd all been changed, and they didn't know why. That's when the survivors noticed something else. There were people standing outside in the rain, hundreds of them. Not a single one they could recognize. All new people, waiting. Sam said only one word, "outside," before walking out of the hunting goods store and disappearing into the crowd and the rain, never to be seen again. Margaret mused that perhaps in the end, she had the right idea. To be taken, killed, erased, or changed would be inevitable. In the final entry in Margaret's diary, dreams blend with reality as her mind finally gives out from the terror. She realizes in her final moments that there is no way out. There is no escape. There is only water. Water is eternal. The rain is eternal. All will be changed. And given the fact that no trace of Margaret was ever found save for her diary, all her fears turned out to be right. She was taken and replaced by SCP-3300, just as will inevitably happen to all the current citizens of Clearwater the next time SCP-3300 rolls around. It will be as inevitable and as indifferent to those it affects as tomorrow's sunrise. You cannot change the rain, but believe us, in Clearwater, Montana, the rain can change you. There's a monster under my bed. Almost every parent has heard their kids make the claim, and it's usually nothing more than some unusual shadows or at worst a household pest scurrying around. Parents usually tell their child to go back to sleep, or maybe try to dispel their fears by shining a light under the bed. It's a childhood rite of passage, and one that usually passes soon enough. But for one young woman in Missouri, the monster under her bed was very real and very dangerous. SCP-3887-A doesn't seem like she belongs in a containment facility. She's a 24-year-old woman who lived a quiet life in her hometown until things went horribly wrong. She doesn't appear to possess any special abilities, and the Foundation is able to contain her without any difficulty. But wherever she goes, death and destruction follow. It's not her doing, but there is something out there that will not stand to see her hurt in any way. Her personal monster under the bed is very protective, something another young woman found out the hard way. Incident 3887-A-1 occurred in 2014, when the young woman was attending a party with her girlfriend. Her partner was berating and humiliating her in front of the guests, which was apparently not a rare occurrence in their relationship. Suddenly, something manifested under a nearby table, and before she could react, her girlfriend was brutally mauled by the unknown creature. Her limbs were completely severed from her body, and she died at the scene. An undercover SCP agent who was implanted within the local authorities made their way to the scene as soon as possible and found SCP-3887-A in a state of shock. And who could blame her after the encounter she just had with what would become to be known as SCP-3887-B. While 3887-A is a normal human with no unusual abilities or characteristics, 3887-B is anything but. Foundation scientists have described it as a humanoid entity standing over 7 feet tall. Its skin is greenish-gray, and it has 2 long, sharp horns on its head. Its head and neck are covered in thick black hair, and its eyes are a striking yellow color. Its mouth is full of sharp fangs similar to that of a shark, and its elongated arms allow it to move on all 4s. It has a long, hairless tail that resembles a rat's, and possesses both male and female reproductive organs. No one knows where it came from, but they do have an idea why it's sticking around. SCP-3887-B seems to be bonded to SCP-3887-A, and can appear in any darkened area within a 5-meter radius around her. While its favorite location is under 3887-A's bed, which has since been brought to the facility, it appears to be able to teleport wherever she is, just as it did during the party where it made its presence brutally clear. It has odd eating patterns and is able to gain nourishment from practically any object, whether it resembles what we would consider food or not. Its favorite treats, for example, SCP-3887-A's socks, but it does have one weakness that has been useful in containing it. It can't stand the light, and it doesn't just hate it. When SCP-3887-B is exposed to bright light, it develops blisters and wounds and flees to the nearest dark area. SCP Foundation scientists are at a loss to explain exactly what this creature is, though. And SCP-3887-B seems to be a chimera of multiple animals with multiple types of DNA. It possesses DNA similar to humans, but also from a type of oryx with similar horns, as well as a rat with the same type of tail, as well as a common cane toad. And there's even some DNA that doesn't resemble any creature in nature. Studying it further has been trickier, though, because it seems to have the effect of disrupting any electronic recording devices near it, causing lasting damage if it's in proximity to them for too long. There has been one good bit of news for SCP scientists, though, because while it has shown that it can be extremely violent, it has not attacked Foundation officials, not yet at least. Its good behavior may not have anything to do with how it personally feels about Foundation staff, though, and is instead all thanks to SCP-3887-A. 3887-A has been completely cooperative since she was taken into custody by the Foundation. She doesn't perceive them as a threat, and so far it seems like SCP-3887-B is following her lead. It has a strong emotional connection to the young woman, and when they're alone, they show affectionate behavior towards each other. While the creature does not seem to like the Foundation, it doesn't seem like it wants to become hostile, until the Foundation gives it a reason to. When 3887-A was interviewed following the tragic incident by undercover Foundation agent Bellamy, she was panicked and terrified. She admitted that her partner often treated her badly and believed that the creature was trying to protect her. She admitted that she had seen the creature before. She even had a name for it. She called her Grenda. 3887-A thought she was crazy. Now there was proof though. She was not imagining the monster under her bed. Describing Grenda as her boogeyman, the young woman talked about how she had known the creature since she was a child. She grew up in an old house in the country that was full of strange sounds that made it sound like something was in her room with her. And sometimes she would even catch a glimpse of what she thought was a monster under her bed watching her. She tried telling her parents, but they thought she was making the whole thing up. And even she was forced to wonder if she was hallucinating or had somehow imagined the whole thing. But then when she was a teenager, all of her doubts were put to bed. One night, 3887-A's parents were loudly fighting, a sadly not rare occurrence in their household, and she locked herself in her room to get away from them. As she hid, Grenda emerged from under her bed for the first time and talked with her. And she isn't the only one that Grenda is willing to speak with. She's also sat down for her own interviews with Foundation researchers. Well, the researchers sat down, while Grenda remained under the bed. Foundation researcher Dr. Tanner interviewed Grenda, who was cordial but guarded, and remained deeply protective of the girl under her protection. She expressed feeling guilty for getting 3887-A in trouble, but Dr. Tanner assured her that 3887-A was not being punished and was being kept at the Foundation for her own safety. He offered that they could keep Grenda safe as well, but she responded that as long as 3887-A remains safe, then she would be as well. She explained that her kind fed on the anxiety of children, which was why they lurked under their beds. She was apparently only supposed to remain with this girl until she was 10 or so, but became attached and decided to stay with her, which was against the rules of her people, and as a result she had been exiled from her home. At this point, Grenda offered to show herself to the researcher and began to emerge from under the bed. Unfortunately, as has become standard when attempting to document SCP-3887-B, all of the recording equipment malfunctioned and was unable to record Grenda's appearance. The Foundation continued to have questions about this pair and their strange relationship, and interviewed SCP-3887-A again, this time by a Dr. Garden. 3887-A told Dr. Garden that she had been sleeping well and had been spending lots of time talking to the entity under her bed. That led Dr. Garden to bring up a theory about how SCP-3887-B had come to exist. The young woman speculated that Grenda may have been created from her fears. One of her first memories of being scared was when she went to an aquarium and a massive bull shark came close to the glass where it bared its rows and rows of shark teeth, the exact same kind of teeth that Grenda possessed. In fact, all of the traits Grenda exhibited, like her rat tail, seemed to connect to childhood fears that she had experienced. 3887-A always felt alone as a little girl, and she believed that she might have manifested Grenda as a companion who was there exactly when she needed her to be. This raised the question of whether SCP-3887-B really was the unnatural entity, or if SCP-3887-A is the source of the entity's existence. The next interview with SCP-3887-B would raise even more questions. When Dr. Garden went to interview SCP-3887-B, it was clear that the entity was agitated. Grenda became hostile as soon as Dr. Garden entered the room, saying she was hungry and didn't want to answer questions. When Dr. Garden said that 3887-A had provided it with socks, the entity reacted with anger. The socks were just a snack. To live, it needed fear. 3887-B fed off human emotions, specifically paranoia and anxiety. SCP-3887-A used to be full of them, but now she was unusually calm in the facility and it was having a bad effect on her companion. When Dr. Garden promised to talk to supervisors, the creature became more agitated and reached out from under the bed, grabbing Dr. Garden and pulling her under the bed. No one knew what would happen to Dr. Garden under the bed, and SCP-3887-A was quickly summoned to try to calm her companion down. But when she called for Grenda, there was no response. It was feared that Dr. Garden had been lost to the area under the bed that no one can access. But then 13 minutes later, the doctor suddenly emerged from under the bed. She was bruised, soaking wet, and missing articles including shoes, socks, and her glasses. Later interviews with Dr. Garden would give the best picture yet of where SCP-3887-B comes from. Dr. Garden described being pulled under the bed, which then led somewhere else entirely. She fell for 15 seconds, still being held by SCP-3887-B. But when she landed, she was alone in a large cave made of black rock with purple gems in the walls. The cave contained a waterfall, a lake, and what looked like SCP-3887's secret home. It was filled with pictures of the girl she was bonded to, a violin, some stuffed animals, and large piles of the girl's socks. SCP-3887-B was there in the cave with her too, watching her. She would catch glimpses of the creature, her white fangs and her yellow eyes. She was terrified and ran screaming, trying to find any way out of there as the creature pursued her. She couldn't evade her forever though, and eventually Grenda grabbed Dr. Garden. She was lifted into the air as Grenda bared her shark-like teeth, but instead of eating her, the creature instead took off the doctor's socks and thanked her, before somehow sending her back up into the darkness. She then found herself back under the bed, surrounded by worried SCP personnel. Since then, SCP-3887-B has not brought anyone else into its home. It seems feeding on Dr. Garden's fear was enough for the time being, and the situation has remained stable since. The SCP Foundation has been able to develop relatively simple containment procedures for the two entities that make up SCP-3887, as neither is currently hostile. The two are contained within a standard humanoid containment cell with the bed at the center. SCP-3887-A is given standard amenities, a healthy diet including a vitamin for some minor health issues, and her own control over the lights in the cell. She has requested and been given a gaming system for entertainment and up-to-date entertainment media, but was denied access to the internet, a pet cat, and access to the on-site recreation areas, due to the risk of SCP-3887-B getting loose. The facility does have plans in place in case Grenda decides to become hostile again though. While SCP-3887-A normally maintains control of the lights in her cell, the Foundation has a failsafe installed so they can turn them up at any time. Since SCP-3887-B reacts negatively to bright light, the lights can be used as a security system to send her retreating back under the bed until she can be pacified through other measures. While neither of the SCP-3887 entities appears to be seeking to escape, it is impossible to predict where and how 3887-B would act if 3887-A was free from her cell again, and whether she would attempt to harm those she perceives as a threat to 3887-A as she did in the past. So for now, the Foundation is focused on keeping both of them pacified, which in the case of 3887-B means a healthy supply of socks. But there's one other lingering question the Foundation hasn't solved. SCP-3887-B referenced being exiled from its kin for breaking the rules and was confined to a cave. That means there might be others like Grenda out there, and they may be more aggressive and less scrupulous than she is. While no other specimens have been found, the SCP Foundation will be keeping a careful eye on any reports of monsters lurking under children's beds. They might just be telling the truth. The SCP Foundation is no stranger to pure evil. Whether it's a reptile that wants to end all life, a sadistic old man with his own torture dimension, or the personification of death itself lurking beyond a limestone cavern. But what if there was something even worse out there? The embodiment of chaos and cruelty, existing across multiple realities and dimensions. And what if it was coming for us? This is the Scarlet King, believed by many to be the ultimate evil behind much of the trouble the Foundation has faced, and some even speculate that fighting him was the reason the Foundation was created in the first place. But what exactly is the Scarlet King? He's known by many names, almost always including some allusion to the color red, and then a reference to royalty or power. Harak, Kaharak, the Red Shah, the Crimson Khan, PTE 616 Mendez Ex Machina, the Laha Raja, and, of course, SCP-001, to name a few. And like many of the Foundation's mysterious enemies, stories about his true nature and origins abound and are often contradictory. According to the official SCP-001 files of Tufto's proposal, symbology of the Scarlet King has existed in multiple cultures throughout history, with the king often depicted the same way, as a huge red demonic figure, often wearing a gold crown or other headdress indicating royalty. He shows up looking similarly within different cultures' mythologies, despite existing at different points in history or them not having the means to communicate with one another. A number of entities that the SCP Foundation is familiar with are believed to be somehow connected to the Scarlet King, including SCP-2317, a wooden door leading to the realm of a being known as the Devourer, who's expected to escape and cause an apocalyptic event in the next 30 years. But really, there's no way of knowing just how many SCPs are directly connected to the Scarlet King. Strangely, the Foundation's official file on the Scarlet King once designated his containment class as Keter, but that has since been downgraded to Safe. According to the file, any attempt to change this designation is likely to lead to horrifying results. It is widely known that the Scarlet King still has considerable influence over a number of groups, individuals, and anomalies in our universe. And if ever he made his way into our universe, it would likely lead to the irreversible damage of reality itself. So then why Safe? And why are the O5 Council so adamant that it remain that way? Getting to the bottom of this mystery is exactly why we're here today. But to fully grasp the true nature of the Scarlet King, we must first understand the man whose life and fate have always been tied to it, Dr. Robert Montauk. If that name feels oddly familiar to you, it's because of its association with one of the Scarlet King's most recent attempts to enter our reality, SCP-231. This SCP, often referred to as the Brides of the Scarlet King, was formed of 7 women. 7, by the way, being an extremely significant number for the king, all kidnapped by the most recent in a long line of the king's devoted cults known as the Children of the Scarlet King. Each of these 7 unfortunate women were impregnated with anomalous horrors, such as the infamous SCP-682, and every time one of these horrors were birthed, a catastrophe occurred and the mother died. At the time, Dr. Montauk was a prominent researcher studying this anomaly, and as 6 catastrophes had already occurred, pressure was mounting to figure out a way to prevent the final birth. But as he was working on the issue, Dr. Montauk was struck with a personal tragedy, the mysterious disappearance of his 14-year-old brother Jacob. In his fear and anger, Montauk believed that this must have something to do with the Scarlet King and his disciples. Wanting revenge, Montauk proposed an idea so horrifying that the details were never made public. A procedure known as 110 Montauk, to be performed on the final bride at regular intervals. However, this wasn't the end of Dr. Montauk's fraught relationship with the Scarlet King. It was just the beginning. To give you some perspective on just how dangerous the Scarlet King is, the SCP Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition decided to put aside their differences and form a joint effort to stamp out the children of the Scarlet King. They were successful in this mission, and even managed to capture the children's leader, a mysterious man named Depeche Spivak. Dr. Montauk, who became the lead researcher on 231 and 2317, was naturally the first choice for interviewing Depeche about the true nature of the children and of the Scarlet King. Dr. Montauk could never be the impartial interviewer that the SCP Foundation wanted, though. The suspicion that the Scarlet King or the children had something to do with the loss of his younger brother still lingered just beneath the surface. Like a lot of cult leaders, Depeche was extremely cryptic in his answers to Dr. Montauk's questioning. He'd already heard of the doctor from the reputation of the horrifying Montauk procedure, and was surprised to see him so calm and courteous in person. A few key facts about the king and his cult were revealed in the first few rounds of questioning. The children had once worked with the Serpent's Hand before being excommunicated for their allegiance to the king, and they had stolen sacred texts from the mystical Wanderer's Library to assist in their summoning rituals. Depeche also revealed that the Scarlet King is bound by 3 laws: the law of blood, the law of concrete, and the law of howling. Dr. Montauk, confused and frustrated by Depeche's secrecy, had to learn more. He found an old memoir from a former member of the Children of the Scarlet King, Jack Hirsch, who had the ability to invade the minds of people from the past and experience what they experienced. He recounted a battle between the Scarlet King and his followers and a group of time-traveling Turkmen warriors from SCP-3838. Hurst saw both sides of the battle. From the perspective of the Children of the Scarlet King, their lord ruled over them from an immense fortress embedded in a volcano. From the perspective of the Turkmen, the children were starved and beaten peasants, commanded by the king's voice in the roaring howl of the wind. Montauk also found extensive records of summoning rituals performed by various Scarlet King-aligned cults. Interestingly, some of them incorporated the use of carved SCP Foundation symbols. What could this mean? Montauk returned again to Depeche, who finally gave him the truth about the law of blood. This is the law of the Scarlet King. It's defined by poverty, violence, starvation, hate, and most of all, fear. Like the serfs in the Middle Ages, persecuted by and subjected to violence from the nobles. To the Children of the Scarlet King, this sense of holy pain and awe is the only way to live. The alternative is the law of concrete, which means the modern age defined by empty safety and false comfort. Buildings, easy to access food, healthcare, knowledge, technology. This is everything that the Scarlet King despises. But the mystery only deepened as Montauk found files from a former Foundation operative by the name of Agent de Beauvoir. Montauk learned that the Scarlet King didn't seem to appear until after the Foundation was created. And in fact, it seemed that the greater interest the Foundation took in the Scarlet King, the more powerful he became. How could this be? Things were also getting stranger on a personal level for Dr. Montauk. Depeche repeatedly pressed him about his brother's disappearance and the Montauk procedure during the interviews. Little by little, it was beginning to take its toll. The questions still plagued him. What was the law of howling? Who or what really is the Scarlet King? How did he come to be? Montauk's search was causing him to act more like the Children of the Scarlet King, ranting about the horrors of the modern world. How all of us are living a lie, how the only honest way to live is suffering under the dominion of the Scarlet King. This philosophy is summed up in the words of one cultist named Ariadne Cartwright, who said, "We must learn what it is to die, to be enslaved, truly, brutally enslaved, with no compassion or compunction from our masters. We must learn what it is to be taken towards a single purpose, to know and truly understand our lack of agency. We must be beholden to the words of gods and darkness, the tempest-tossed refuse of a race of fools. We must kill modernity, postmodernity, with all its analysis and sneering observation. There is only one rule, the rule of chaos, for humanity, for life, for the Scarlet King." Basically, anytime humanity tries to exert control over the world, the Scarlet King gets stronger. Every time they try to understand or organize or categorize their world, the Scarlet King gets stronger. As colonial and imperial powers conquered and invaded lands like India, Africa, and South America, and subjugated their beliefs under Western ideas, the Scarlet King grew stronger. Montauk was beginning to truly understand the power of his enemy here, and even worse, he was starting to understand his part in it. Montauk, slowly being driven mad by the knowledge he was gaining, realized that the Scarlet King's greatest enemy, the SCP Foundation, was also its greatest asset. Every time they tried to understand the monster, to give him some kind of comprehensible form, they only made him more powerful. Just in time with Montauk's new revelation, a red crack appeared in the wall of Depeche Spivak's containment cell, a portal to the realm of the Scarlet King. Foundation staff found they were unable to enter the cell, and Depeche demanded a final interview with Montauk. With no other options, the Foundation relented. In their very last conversation, Depeche congratulated Montauk for finally understanding what he was dealing with. The Scarlet King, Depeche told him, is an idea, a concept. He is a being given power through the conflict between the old and the new. This is the law of the Howling. The Scarlet King's endless rage at the direction the world and humanity has taken. The King, according to Depeche, hated the Foundation's belief that science and rationality was the true path to progress. The King saw this as little more than petty arrogance. The reason Montauk's procedure on the final bride of the Scarlet King was so effective was because it wasn't born out of science. It was born out of hate, pain, the desire for revenge, and in the Scarlet King's realm, that would be all there is. Unless our world, and especially the Foundation, changed its course, the Scarlet King's rise to absolute power would be inevitable. Montauk, his mind practically gone, asked one last question. Did the children or the Scarlet King take his brother, Jacob? When Depeche told him the answer, no. And in response, Montauk shot him dead, finally bringing an end to the children of the Scarlet King. In light of his new revelations, Montauk begged the O5 Council to change their ways in order to avoid letting the Scarlet King break into our reality. They refused, saying Montauk's ideas were too radical. But they knew they couldn't just ignore the threat posed by the Scarlet King. They would have to take some steps. And so the O5 Council of the SCP Foundation, the most powerful and secretive group in the entire world, in order to prevent the most dangerous threat that humanity has ever known from breaking into our reality and enslaving all the people of the world, finally did something. They changed the classification of the Scarlet King from Keter to safe, and made its description on the official Foundation files deliberately vague. The O5 Council thinks this will be enough to stop the Scarlet King's power from continuing to grow, but Montauk knew it wasn't enough. He had seen the truth, and he couldn't unsee it. While the Foundation was going on as normal, Montauk grew to despise them. He knew the Scarlet King was coming. He knew that he couldn't be stopped, and that our whole reality was little more than sitting ducks. Dr. Robert Montauk is no longer a researcher for the SCP Foundation. No, Dr. Robert Montauk chose a different path. He's now a child of the Scarlet King, a devotee of madness, hate, and chaos. You can't beat the Scarlet King after all, and as the old adage goes, if you can't beat him, join him. Ask yourself a simple question. Is the world around you real? It seems like the answer should be pretty obvious. Of course the world as you know it is real. How else would you be able to interact with it? Perhaps a better question would be this. How much do you trust that the world you know is real? How much do you believe that reality, as you experience it, is constant and cannot be changed by external forces? Now imagine, if you can, an entity to which the very fabric of reality is like clay, able to be shaped and molded at will. Then imagine that this entity, this malicious, twisted, and unknowable horror, has taken a special interest in you. If you can picture such a scenario, then you may as well be standing in the shoes of James Talleyrand, a Foundation researcher assigned to SCP-3999. Talleyrand could only have imagined what the Foundation kept contained in an airtight cell all the way at the bottom of a kilometer-long shaft, and never expected that this was where his lifeless body would be found. Despite having the entity contained, the Foundation's only knowledge of SCP-3999 came from a text document discovered on Talleyrand's phone after his demise. Even their own records indicated that no such creature ever existed. Why? What could possibly shape reality in such a way that it could hide its own existence from the Foundation? And where was it now? The document on Talleyrand's phone yielded some evidence, seeming to be a long, rambling, and confused account of some sort of battle between a reality-shaping entity and the ill-fated researchers sent to examine it. Unlike many of the Foundation's documents, the entry for SCP-3999 is riddled with contradictions and strike-throughs, a confusing mess of information that makes piecing together the mysteries of Talleyrand's fate all the more difficult. Beneath the strange formatting and uncertainty surrounding SCP-3999 lies the tale of one man's torture for the amusement of an impossibly powerful and eternally sadistic creature. Based on the information available, it appears that SCP-3999 was fixated on Talleyrand. Upon his arrival to the entity's cell, the researcher had no idea how long he would spend in the company of SCP-3999, or that he would never emerge alive. Many SCPs contained by the Foundation require their own specially made prisons in order to hold them and maintain the safety of Foundation staff as well as the outside world. But imagine if an SCP could turn the tables, bending the world around a single member of the Foundation, using all of reality as their own personalized torture chamber. The list of horrors endured by Talleyrand is both exhaustive and incomplete, given the length of time he spent with the creature. Shortly after James Talleyrand was assigned to Site 118, where SCP-3999 was contained, the entity was somehow able to breach containment and began to twist the world around it in the name of a singular, cruel objective: the torture of James Talleyrand. The creature, while having no physical description, possessed the capability to cause either a CK-class reality restructuring event or a ZK-class end-of-reality event. SCP-3999 was somehow able to both destroy reality itself while simultaneously rebuilding it around its prisoner, Researcher Talleyrand. Every creature, person, and machination that SCP-3999 created was done so with the express intention of making Talleyrand suffer horribly over the course of millions of years, according to the researcher's own writings. The exact details of how SCP-3999 tortured Talleyrand are littered throughout the document he was found with, but it is apparent that the entity was able to use its reality-altering abilities to continually revive the man after killing him as a way to prolong his pain. SCP-3999 seemed to be able to use its powers however it pleased, but focused all its attention and actions on causing misery for one man. It simply enjoyed inflicting suffering. One of the examples of the atrocities James Talleyrand suffered at the mercy of a cold, remorseless creature was witnessing the deaths of others. Although they were constructed and controlled by SCP-3999, Talleyrand saw trained Foundation security personnel drag 3 people into the cell. He recognized them instantly as his own family. Talleyrand was made to watch as his mother, father, and sister were executed with a single gunshot to the head by members of the same organization that he was a part of. All of Talleyrand's professional colleagues were also killed in front of him, followed by anyone and everyone that had come into contact with James Talleyrand, including the O5 Council. He was made to watch as they were systematically murdered one by one, all for the enjoyment of SCP-3999. At some point during the creature's torture of Talleyrand, there appears to have been some attempt to contain SCP-3999 within another SCP, SCP-2432, a room within a hotel now owned by the Foundation that appears to compel its guests to write exaggerated positive reviews after staying there. When introduced to SCP-2432, SCP-3999's ability to alter reality seemed to have the effect of creating a dimensional anomaly within the hotel. A crawlspace opened up in SCP-2432, leading to an almost identical room. The front door of this new room, designated SCP-2432-1, led to an alternate dimension that resembled the hotel housing SCP-2432. The rooms of this new version of the SCP-2432 hotel were a seemingly infinite, endless loop of rooms. This dimension also played host to a number of strange creatures, as uncovered by Foundation research teams that ventured there. Most notably, a creature resembling a male Homo sapien, calling itself Researcher Talleyrand. This being was dressed in clothing similar to Foundation researchers and appeared nervous and confused when approached by personnel, only to be executed when asked to be told the location of SCP-3999. Later during SCP-3999's 3 million year torture session, James Talleyrand was interviewed with another doctor working for the Foundation. The interviewing doctor had no recollection of Talleyrand's assignment to SCP-3999, and both James's involvement with the Foundation and the very existence of SCP-3999 were expunged from the Foundation's database. As Talleyrand desperately tried to rationalize what was happening to him, he told the interviewer, "I have trouble focusing on things now. I just feel a lot of unease. It's like reality has started to feel less real, if that makes sense." Shortly after, he attempted to ask the doctor for his name and for him to identify which of the Foundation sites they were at. In response, the doctor emitted a strange noise from his mouth, confusing Talleyrand. "That's not a name. You just made a noise with your mouth," the researcher replied. "Why am I thinking of redactions? How can a word be redacted like that in a normal conversation?" Following this, the floor beneath James Talleyrand's feet disappeared, and he was swallowed by darkness, as SCP-3999 continued bending reality to make him suffer. What followed were multiple failed attempts from Talleyrand to either escape from the entity or nullify its abilities to warp reality. SCP-3999 had, at a later point, trapped Talleyrand in a stage play version of its cell. As James frantically tried to escape out of a nearby door, where he hoped to find reality, he was met with a solid wall. "I'm trapped in whatever this place is with this thing, and there's no outside reality anymore," he realized. Researcher Talleyrand tried to understand the entity, but SCP-3999 defied description. It was simply chaos. In his desperation, Talleyrand was able to dig a tiny hole in the floor through which he could see a light. Filled with thoughts of his beloved family, his colleagues, and the rest of the world that had once existed, he opened the hole wider. It is unclear what happened after this, but it is apparent that James Talleyrand was still unable to escape SCP-3999. However, as the situations he found himself in grew increasingly strange, James Talleyrand was able to take greater control of his predicament. This is evidenced in the Foundation's document regarding SCP-3999. Researcher Talleyrand cannot be contained by this. Researcher Talleyrand will fight his way back. Researcher Talleyrand will recontain SCP-3999. This torture had gone on long enough, and researcher James Talleyrand was determined to be free of the creature that had taken such sick pleasure in his pain. Talleyrand at one point was able to subdue SCP-3999, although it is initially unclear how he accomplished this. There were several attempts made to contain the entity, using a recursive joke, a melon, the graves of American crime novelist Robert B. Parker, or an O5 council member, and a roach motel. It is believed that every single one of these attempts failed. Attempting to beat the creature at its own game, Talleyrand tried to turn SCP-3999's reality-altering powers against it by imagining the entity as something easier to subdue. These included several moldy blankets, a murderous penguin, and a pillow. Eventually, Talleyrand was able to contain SCP-3999 with the aid of 48 trained containment personnel, all of whom were also researcher Talleyrand. During this time, a conversation between the two were partially recorded, although any dialogue from SCP-3999 suffered from data corruption. Claiming to finally be in charge and in control of the situation, Talleyrand interrogated SCP-3999, berating the creature for keeping him prisoner. "You can't frighten me anymore. For the first million years of nonsensical containment procedures and tortures and dream logic, it was the worst pain I had ever felt, but I survived. For the second million years, it was still the hardest thing I had ever done, but I survived. By the third million years, I was growing numb." The researcher tried to ascertain the exact nature and origin of SCP-3999, but to no avail. Vowing to fight the entity, Talleyrand told it, "Here's the thing about horror and weirdness. The more you reveal of it, the less effect it has. I am sick of your horror. I am sick of you." Afterwards, he was melted into goo for 5 years. It appears that shortly after this, researcher Talleyrand managed to understand how to destroy SCP-3999. While the entity was immortal and virtually unstoppable, he realized its weakness, that it had to bond to another being in order to survive. Upon discovering this, Talleyrand took his own life, causing all that SCP-3999 had done to disappear. After Foundation researcher James Talleyrand committed suicide, reality reverted to its original state, before SCP-3999 had heavily altered it. His death freeing reality from the evil entity once and for all. The Foundation remains unaware of what SCP-3999 was or indeed is, and one can only guess as to why the entity subjugated Talleyrand to such terror and horror. What made this powerful reality bender hold such a perverse fixation on one man? Some have likened the creature to a horror writer, continually subjugating a character to all manner of nightmares before deciding to redraft and try something new. Whatever it was, SCP-3999 carries with it a warning that reality isn't always as it seems.
It was 1965, and the Chicago PD was investigating a meatpacking plant reported to be the home of a devil-worshipping cult, complete with allegations of human sacrifice. There, the cops were met with heavy resistance. A firefight broke out between the police and the occult worshippers who flooded out of the plant's basement. The cops were pinned down and in trouble, but they had a secret weapon, heavily armed and decked out in sophisticated ballistic armor and covered in strange insignia. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 9, also known as the Fire Eaters, here to assist the cops on behalf of the SCP Foundation. As always with the Foundation, they had no interest in some mere human cultists. Those were a dime a dozen in the world of anomalous monsters. What the Foundation had taken an interest in was who or what these cultists were worshipping. It all begun a few weeks back, near Danforth Meatpacking, an abandoned meatpacking plant just outside of Chicago. No one had given the place a thought in decades, that is, until people started going missing. Rumors spread of people being snatched in the surrounding woods by figures dressed in robes. Mysterious voices and noises were said to be coming out from the cavernous belly of the plant. Some even reported seeing smoke rising out of the building. Thick, black, noxious smoke. Something was terribly wrong here. Something was anomalous. The Chicago Police Department's strike force, in association with the Fire Eaters from the Foundation, mobilized at Danforth Meatpacking. While the police were initially reluctant to work with these mysterious figures, they turned out to be indispensable for the raid. There were 47 cultists holding out in the basement of the plant, many of them heavily armed, and all of them hopped up on zealous devotion to their unknown master. All except one of the cultists fought to the death during a tense firefight with Chicago PD and the Fire Eaters. The single survivor was still heavily injured and was taken to a secure Foundation facility for emergency treatment and debriefing. Typically, the Foundation would need to perform extensive tests on the Danforth meatpacking plant to discover the source of the anomaly's activity. However, this time, it was a Chicago detective who asked the question that busted the case wide open. The hell's with the giant pig? And while it would turn out to be a whole lot more than that, there was indeed a giant iron furnace shaped like a pig in the center of the facility. Measuring 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points, the thing was a behemoth. It had an internal furnace despite no apparent fuel source, and a 5-centimeter slot of unknown purpose on the side of the machine's immense rusted hide. Naturally, all the police officers involved in the raid had their memories wiped and restructured, and they were lucky, because they'd remain forever ignorant of the true horrors about to unfold in the confines of that godforsaken factory. As is standard procedure, the plant was isolated, and a Foundation research team, led by lead researcher Westron, under the authority of Regional Director Caleb, was installed on the new provisional site to conduct tests. Other than everyone feeling somewhat uneasy around it, this new anomaly, dubbed SCP-4511, didn't seem to exhibit any strange activities save for its perpetually burning fire. But during the initial research period, a small white card suddenly popped out of the slot in SCP-4511's side. A researcher carefully approached and looked at the card. There was writing. It said, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." Though nobody on the team had any idea what this meant. After going through a shootout with a considerable death toll to get to it, having a giant metal pig-shaped furnace spit out a cryptic card was strange. But at the secret medical facility where the surviving cultist was being held, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. As he lay in a bed suffering from his injuries, he pulled one of the medical staff close and uttered cryptic, dying words.
Give whatever it demands, or your suffering will be beyond measure.
He expired seconds later, less than 72 hours after the raid. Back at the meatpacking plant, at the exact same time, another white card was produced by the machine, reading, Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly churn. Period. 1 week. Perhaps this entity was a little more intelligent than they thought. A number of researchers on the team, invigorated by this new development, were eager to press forward with experiments. Lead researcher Western, however, did not share their enthusiasm. Something about this entire situation felt like a grim omen to him. This entity had a plan far beyond their understanding, and on some deep animal level, he knew that helping this thing see its plans through would lead to disastrous results. On this first gut impulse, he denied the request for further experiments, but Regional Director Caleb had other ideas. Caleb overruled Western's command, and the experiments began shortly after. The entity, jokingly nicknamed the Swine God by researchers, had made its demand. The metal teeth that endlessly churn. But what could that mean? It wasn't long before the entity began to produce more cards, each with their own strange and esoteric demands. However, on some instinctual level, the researchers at the site understood the demands perfectly. The next card's demand was, the metal of this suffocating prison. Upon receiving this demand, researchers collected scrap metal from around the new site and tossed them into the furnace beyond the swine god's jaws one by one. Inside, they heard the sound of metal crunching. Hours later, all the other metal in the site began to rapidly oxidize and rust, though SCP-4511 itself remained unaffected. The card that came after delivered another simple request. Oil to slicken my frozen joints. The researchers understood and procured 3 large barrels of oil and tossed them into the furnace. The entity let out a deep gurgle before shaking violently and expelling excess oil, rusted metal, and 2 domesticated pig femurs. It turns out that the swine god had an appetite for pigs, as the next card that rumbled out of the machine bore the request, 2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh. In response, the researchers provided the entity with 2 adult pigs. Just like the previous requests, they too were tossed into the fiery depths of the giant pig's mouth, from which came the horrible sounds of pigs squealing, and then a low, guttural gurgling. Next, the request was, the hooks used to hang my children's corpses. To satisfy this request, the researchers provided 17 meat hooks. In response, 4511 spat out a metal sphere at an extremely high velocity, killing observing Foundation Agent McHenry. For reasons that weren't apparent at the time, rather than giving Agent McHenry a proper burial, his body was also fed into the hungry machine. Lead researcher Western's concerns were mounting, but that didn't amount to much now. 4511 had developed a taste for flesh, and the researchers were all too eager to obey its command. On the swine god's order, it was fed a German shepherd. An hour later, the entity spat out some teeth, 6 of which came from a dog and 1 from a human. More than once, it released a card with a blunt request. A worker for the line. The researchers knew exactly what this meant. It required a human sacrifice. SCP-4511 was given 2 D-Class personnel. 1 was flung back out seconds later, crunched and burned to death, with several internal organs missing. The other had a more mysterious and altogether upsetting fate. The second D-Class was heard screaming in the belly of the furnace for roughly 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a strange liquid was excreted by the machine. When the liquid was tested, they found trace amounts of chemicals like pig urine and motor oil, but most disturbing of all, human genetic material that was identical to that of lead researcher Western. It seemed that the swine god had finally taken an interest in him. After some final requests for large quantities of coal and even human children to fuel its fires, it made a request that sent the whole thing crashing down. The false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. Lead researcher Western knew what this meant. They all did. The swine god was demanding him in sacrifice. Lead researcher Westron tried to shut down the entire project, but the swine god was faster than him. One of his own researchers shot Westron in the leg, as the others gathered round and forcibly restrained him. He tried to reason with his subordinates, but it didn't do him any good. The swine god had crawled into all their minds and corrupted them. They were his servants now, and Westron was doomed. Despite his protests, the servants forced him into the mouth of SCP-4511, and after a little over 4 minutes of screaming, Westron was devoured just like all the other sacrifices. Upon receiving news of the horrors unfolding in the Danforth meatpacking plant, Regional Director Caleb declared the security of the site compromised and sent in Mobile Task Force Epsilon 11, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox. The 4 elite MTF soldiers were given the simple instruction to figure out exactly what had happened and to eliminate any potentially compromised Foundation staff members who'd fallen under the swine god's power. When the team arrived, they realized just how far gone the whole place was. Almost everyone was dead, having been sacrificed to the machine, and the ones that were left were completely insane. They attacked the task force, shouting in their madness about how no matter what the Foundation does to them, it would be nothing compared to what it would do. It had them all under its rusty iron foot. The team was forced to fend off repeated attacks from the pig's devotees, and even found the powers of the swine god starting to affect their own minds. The beast was more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The trained Foundation researchers and guards had been transformed into the same cultists they'd fought to gain control of the building by the mind-bending power of the swine god. The MTF were forced to retreat and return with reinforcements to truly clean the place out. Once a slaughterhouse, always a slaughterhouse. At this point, Regional Director Caleb took personal responsibility over the casualties, since he'd been the one who signed off on the experiments in the first place. He gave up his Regional Director rank and deemed himself the new lead researcher on the 4511 case, now that he fully understood the scope and danger of the entity they were dealing with. He wanted to lead the charge in discovering more about the anomaly and hopefully someday negating its deadly effects. This may sound like a happy ending, in spite of all the violence, bloodshed, and human sacrifice that brought us here. But beware of the premature celebration. Despite investigation, the swine god retained no evidence of the objects, animals, and people it consumed and burned. Perhaps it burnt them down to their very atoms, if those even still existed. What we do know is that not long after lead researcher Caleb and his subordinates installed themselves into the facility, SCP-4511 produced one more little white card. It read, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." And if we've learned anything today, it's that the swine god gets whatever it demands, a brutal truth that lead researcher Caleb is likely to understand much sooner than he thought. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself, but since you're still alive, whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-5049, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, commercials, commercials. As far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man, Demon Dan, coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride. Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP Lookalike Department. We all know how difficult the creation of Homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again. Not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Kettier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans. Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including Security Agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin.
Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing once I'm through with you.
Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. The creature dematerialized, before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons, and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. When the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts, they were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan. And through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off.
Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything.
Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said, "You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us.
I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming.
And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time, a different entity was starring in it. It's the holiday season. Outside it's cold and there's snow blanketing the ground, but inside you're warm and gathered around the light of a roaring fireplace and a glowing Christmas tree. This is what Christmas is all about: warmth, joy, and togetherness. But just because you're comfortable doesn't mean you're safe. You were so busy opening presents and stuffing yourself at dinner that you didn't notice the face pressed up against the window. That long, gaunt face with the staring eyes, the wide mouth full of yellow teeth, and the scraggly white beard. You don't know it yet, but within a few days, you'll be dead. You might be able to avert this horrible fate if you knew what exactly you were dealing with. SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man, a Keter-class Christmas monster so violent, sadistic, and terrifying, he makes Krampus look like Jolly Saint Nick. And this year, just like every other, he's planning on being very, very naughty. The SCP Foundation began cataloging the Yule Man in 1974 after a string of violent and eerily similar home invasions during the holiday season. But they have reason to believe that this entity has been around for a whole lot longer. Over 2,000 years, in fact. Stories that describe what look to be Yule Man massacres date back as far as the 1st century BC in Scandinavia, and there have been reports of similar clusters of events happening around the same time every year since. This monster is prolific, and may have one of the highest body counts of any creature under observation by the Foundation. The Yule Man's trail of destruction became clearer in the 18th century, as accounts of the carnage it leaves became more detailed. Later still, authorities even managed to find physical evidence like the Yule Man's fingerprints, which are similar to human fingerprints but display a distinct double whorl pattern not seen in human fingerprints. Much about the anomalous nature of the Yule Man is still unknown though, and the Foundation has yet to discover an effective way to contain it. Their only hope is intercepting it before it can get its long, gnarled fingers on its intended prey. Maybe you're feeling worried, or that you're being watched. You have good reason to be afraid, because during his yearly active period, the 12 days between December 21st and January 2nd, he's always searching for prey. Nowhere is safe, because while it was initially believed that he only appeared to those who live north of 40 degrees latitude, it's now believed that much like Santa Claus, the Yule Man operates worldwide. Anyone could be in his sights right now, blissfully unaware of the nightmare coming down the tracks towards them. Thankfully, the SCP Foundation, through analysis of these attacks, which are known as Weihnacht events, they've been able to find certain patterns. But first, what does the creature known as the Yule Man even look like? Much like SCP-096, the Yule Man is a long and lanky humanoid, standing about 2 meters tall, who resembles an emaciated human of European descent, and never wears any clothes or other coverings despite the frigid temperatures he operates in. You might be sad if you're spending Christmas alone, but it at least guarantees you safety from the Yule Man, as he only appears at the homes of families with a child under the age of 8 present. He also seems to favor isolated and rural locations, and Weihnacht events only occur when there's a healthy covering of snow on the ground during the event, hence the name, which means White Night in English. It's also vital that you recognize the 3 distinct stages of a Weihnacht event too, or you won't be seeing much of the new year. The first stage occurs during the space of a week. Children in the home might start to seem worried or afraid.
They might tell you that they see something strange in the distance, the figure of a man they don't recognize, standing just far enough away that you can't fully make him out, except that he's really tall. Of course, you probably won't see anything, and your instinct will be to tell them there's nothing to be afraid of. Even when they tell you, through tears, that there's a man pressing his face up against their bedroom window at night. But they are right to be afraid, and you should be too. Already at this point, your only hope is to try and spread the word as soon as possible. Report the incident to the local police, write about it on Facebook, tweet about it, whatever it takes. The SCP Foundation has operatives trawling the internet and monitoring police reports constantly during this period, especially for reports of mysterious men in the snow watching homes from a distance. Getting the Foundation's attention is your best hope of stopping this thing. And if you don't, next comes Stage 2, taking place between nights 8 and 11 of the active period. No longer will the Yule Man just be lurking on the periphery. Now he's getting closer. You'll start to hear strange noises in your attic or on the roof. Noises that sound almost like footsteps. That's crazy, you think. It's probably just an animal. But then, the smell starts. An awful rotten stench that fills the house. But no matter how hard you look, you can't find the source. Finally, on the last night of December, you'll tell yourself that you'll take this matter to the police. But of course, it's already too late. The Yule Man is here for the 12th night. The Weihnacht is finally upon you. At this point, one of two scenarios will happen. In the first, you and your entire family will be tortured and murdered, except the youngest child, who the Yule Man will kidnap. The SCP Foundation keeps files on a number of notable instances of this kind of Weihnacht, and the details are truly gruesome. Reports of incidents have involved crucifixion, the removal of tongues, burning, dismemberment, post-mortem bite marks, and decapitation. In all instances, though, the entire family was killed except the youngest child, who simply disappeared. The Yule Man is a merciless and sadistic beast. You're now probably wondering, if that's the first of two Weihnacht possibilities, what's the second? In the second, if you're tremendously lucky, you and your family will survive. But that doesn't mean you won't face a grisly experience. In this scenario, which occurs during about 15% of Weihnacht events, you'll hear footsteps throughout the night. But thankfully, you wake up alive. And when you do so, there are gifts waiting for you. The problem is, all these gifts are made out of human body parts. For example, in 1976 in Canada, one family received the gift of a ball made from a severed human head wrapped in skin. In Kazakhstan in 1903, a family received a flute made from a hollowed-out human femur. And in the Netherlands in 2003, a family received a wooden hairbrush covered in human teeth ranging from 400 years old to a mere few days. These gruesome gifts are referred to as SCP-4666-A, and it was one of these gifts that gave us the best insight yet available into the true nature of the Yule Man. Several gifts were dropped off at a family's residence in Hoonah, Alaska in 2018, but most notably among them was the horrific SCP-4666-A-0960, a life-size doll made from a human body with its eyes removed and mouth sewn shut. Worst of all, though, was that the girl was still alive. The family who received this twisted gift was given ME sticks by the Foundation, and the living doll was taken for medical treatment. Before succumbing to her extensive injuries, the girl was able to deliver some insights into what exactly happened to the children who were abducted during Weihnacht events. The children taken by the Yule Man are forced into a large sack that seems much bigger on the inside than it appears as he makes his rounds, traveling from house to house, murdering and kidnapping. His victims are taken to a kind of underground grotto and workshop filled with bones, like a twisted Santa's workshop, where they're forced to make toys out of the bodies of their fellow victims. During this time, the Yule Man will continue to torture and torment his victims. He'll even take some of them away to cook and eat whenever he feels like it. When asked how she was turned into this human doll, the girl told Foundation personnel that her fellow victims were forced to turn her into this by the Yule Man when she became too weak to continue making toys herself. Her chilling last words were, "When you can't make the toys, you become the toys."
So if strange things happen to you and your family between the 21st of December and the 1st of January, don't ignore it. After all, you never know who's watching. But if it is the Yule Man's grinning face pressed up against your window, it may already be too late. Happy holidays. It's a perfect day for a wedding. On a warm spring afternoon, a bride and a handsome groom are exchanging the special rings they had custom designed and made for each other. As they take turns placing the rings on each other's fingers, a man standing at the end of the wedding party steps out of position. He approaches the groomsman next to him and reaches into his jacket, taking out a pair of pliers that he hands to the groomsman. The groomsman happily takes the tool and then, without any hesitation, shoves the pliers into his mouth and begins removing his teeth one by one. When he is finished, he hands the bloody teeth to the man along with the pliers. The man then goes to the next groomsman, who repeats the same process. He continues going down the line until all of the groomsmen and bridesmaids have removed their teeth, seemingly without pain or resistance. The man then approaches the bride and groom. He hands each of them half of the pile of teeth, which they gladly accept. They then begin to eat the teeth without delay, seemingly not bothered by the intense damage they're causing to their own teeth and jaws by doing so. The man watches as the groom moves the priest who is officiating the wedding aside. As the entire church looks on in joy, the groom opens his mouth, and the deafening sound of cicadas are heard. This is only the beginning of what the SCP Foundation has labeled an SCP-2852 event, a terrifying and little understood phenomenon that is better known by the nickname of the anomalous creature responsible for them, Cousin Johnny. The Foundation had been trying to contain Cousin Johnny for decades, not that it ever done them any good. Johnny is a Keter-class anomaly that's thus far proven impossible to contain. This is an entity so dangerous and volatile that 3 different mobile task forces are devoted to detecting and disrupting its activities. MTF Upsilon 36, aka the Party Crashers, MTF Upsilon 52, aka Cater Duty, and MTF Upsilon 99, aka the Altar Boys. But so far, all the Foundation has been able to really do is swoop in afterwards and do their best to pick up the pieces of people's shattered lives. Cousin Johnny has so far been observed to only operate in the North American subcontinent, and only seems to appear at Anglican or Catholic baptisms, weddings, and funerals. However, Foundation operatives charged with keeping a lid on Cousin Johnny harbor the hidden fear that he may one day expand his hunting grounds and wreak terror worldwide. If Johnny became multinational or multi-denominational, his violence, insanity, and pure evil may truly become impossible to minimize. So compatible communities are constantly monitored for increased levels of juvenile delinquency, sterility, domestic violence, and divorce. After all this, you're probably wondering, who or what actually is Cousin Johnny, and how does he cause so much horrific tragedy? At face value, nothing about the appearance of Cousin Johnny would suggest an anomalous nature, or even any sort of danger. He appears to be a middle-aged white male, often with scruffy hair and a beard. On a cellular level too, Cousin Johnny appears all too human, but when you look at his physiology, it's a whole different story. Cousin Johnny has no identifiable organs whatsoever. His body is made out of a fibrous muscular tissue. The only exceptions are his teeth and hair, which are made out of a kind of chitin, a key component of insect exoskeletons, such as those possessed by cicadas. Johnny's eyes are the first clue that something is off about him. From a distance they appear perfectly normal, but up close they're glassy and dead. This is because his eyes aren't actually attached to any nerves inside his head. With no nervous system or vocal cords, Johnny's ability to see, move, and talk defy any kind of logical explanation. His speech will seem completely normal to the people under his spell, but to anyone else it comes out as complete nonsense, often described as word salad. If people in attendance are briefed in advance about this phenomenon, whatever hypnotic ability causes them to hear his sounds as intelligible words won't work, and they'll be aware of how nonsensical it all sounds. But of course, that doesn't mean they're safe. Cousin Johnny appears at family gatherings and religious rituals, and immediately he'll be treated as though he's always been there. You know your Cousin Johnny, right? You go way back. Or at least you're pretty sure you do. Nothing will appear unnatural about his sudden presence. In fact, if you're one of the victims of one of his incidents, chances are you'll actually find yourself taking a shine to Cousin Johnny. Sure, his sense of humor is a little crude and raunchy, but you can't help but enjoy his company. He's a fun guy to be around, and after all, he's family.
As previously mentioned, he'll only appear at 3 different kinds of events: baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and only those that are affiliated with either the Catholic or Anglican religions. The SCP Foundation has classified baptisms that Cousin Johnny attends as blue-level events, weddings are known as white-level events, and funerals are black-level events, with each one escalating in severity, violence, and horror.
First, baptisms, the blue-level events. In these events, Cousin Johnny will appear and begin to act as a third godparent, despite there traditionally only being 2. As the infant is lowered into the holy water, the entirety of their top layer of skin will come off like a molting snake. Despite looking horrific, this apparently causes no harm to the child. The godparents will then eat this discarded skin as though it's the most normal thing in the world. After this, the family will leave the church together, and Cousin Johnny will leave with them. He won't appear at any subsequent celebrations of the child's baptism. Of course, this is just the beginning of the terror. Following Cousin Johnny's appearance at the baptism, the child's risk of dying in the next 6 months skyrockets, and if they survive, they're at an increased risk of becoming unstable and violent later on in life. Their parents and godparents will both become unable to conceive any further children and are likely to be found dead from drowning within 5 years of the event. Those who are only tangentially involved in the baptism ritual have a massively increased chance of failed pregnancies, or if they do conceive, they may become a danger to their offspring. Children who live through blue-level events and survive past adolescence will experience adverse side effects when encountering the songs of cicadas well into adulthood, from experiencing physical sickness to going through dangerous psychotic episodes. Weddings or white-level events are more complex and severe. In this case, Cousin Johnny will insert himself into the wedding as a groomsman, and the most horrifying events will begin to take place after the vows have been exchanged. Johnny will provide various implements that allow the bridesmaids and groomsmen to remove their teeth, which are then given to the bride and groom to eat, which they do, causing severe damage to their own teeth in the process. The groom will then vocalize an unknown cicada call at an incredible volume, as loud as 140 decibels in some instances, rendering the bride and everyone else near the altar completely deaf. At the wedding reception, where everyone is continuing to behave as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening, Cousin Johnny will ruin things farther by giving the best man's speech. The speech is more of his typical complete nonsense, though if you're there you'll never realize this, and think that this is the best speech you've ever heard, with some in the audience laughing hysterically while others cry uncontrollably. Once his speech is done, he'll present a gift to the newly married couple: 3.5 kilograms of human hair in various colors, 13 deceased specimens of a certain cicada known as Linnaeus cicada, and 23 human teeth in a cardboard box. DNA tests on all the gifts have been inconclusive as to their origin. Much like many celebrity marriages, unions that occurred during white-level events never last, and all end up divorced within 2 years, often as a result of domestic violence, and any children born during their brief marriage will be violent and unstable. But it's not just the wedding party that gets to experience the fun of a visit from Cousin Johnny. All married individuals who attended the wedding will find that they are unable to conceive children, despite no biological indicators of infertility. Any children present at the white-level event will show no interest in romance throughout their life, and often die tragically before reaching the age of 18. Finally, and most horrifying of all, are funerals, or black-level events. While blue and white-level events can potentially be disrupted before they are completed, lessening or preventing the horrific results, there is as yet no way to stop or prevent a black-level event at any stage. Any attempts to prevent Cousin Johnny from entering the church or funeral home will lead him to simply manifesting inside. Once in the room where the funeral is taking place, Cousin Johnny will first take up the role of eulogizer and begin speaking his standard nonsense to the attendants. The person who was emotionally closest to the departed will then open the casket, if this was not already an open casket funeral, and will then produce a large knife. It's unknown where the knives come from, as they're not present before the event and they disappear after. The funeral attendees will then use the knife on their wrists and sometimes throats, draining their blood into the coffin. Many lose more than enough blood to result in death, but none ever die from this. nor do they seem to feel any pain from their wounds. As the attendees take turns bleeding into the coffin, Cousin Johnny continues his eulogy, which eventually evolves into a cicada song, the kind sung by Linnea's cicada males. The attendants sing the same song back to him in a kind of call and response. Cousin Johnny will then approach the coffin and vomit in a mixture of blood, wood pulp, and dead cicadas. The funeral will then proceed as normal, and the blood, vomit, and cicada-filled casket is then taken to the cemetery and buried. Black level events will usually end with the body being interred in the ground, but if there's a wake after the funeral, the horrors of the black level event will continue. At the wake, Cousin Johnny will climb on top of a table, lie down, and encourage the other attendants to devour him, which they do. All the while he continues to talk his nonsense, until there is nothing left. Much like blue and white level events, being in attendance leads to horrific after effects. All participants who experience this event will separate from their family through either suicide, moving, or divorce. Every individual present at the event will also find that they are no longer able to produce offspring, and couples present may also fall victim to incidences of domestic violence, often involving cannibalism, that usually leave one or both participants dead, while 6 out of 10 children involved will attempt to murder one or both of their parents before they turn 18. These black level events are so horrible for all involved that any members of the specialized Cousin Johnny mobile task forces that happen to witness such an event are treated with Class A amnestics before they are transferred to another task force or retire, to ensure that they don't have to live with the memories of what they saw. Prior to that, they are closely monitored for any strange or antisocial behavior to make sure they weren't affected by the event. And they aren't the only SCP Foundation staff at risk of having been impacted by Cousin Johnny. It is theorized that as many as a third of Catholic and Anglican D-Class personnel were involved in the Black Level event at some point, and were driven to madness and violence by their fateful brushes with the strange relative that no one knows. So next time you're at a baptism, or a wedding, or a funeral, stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the other guests, and always ask yourself, do you really have a Cousin Johnny?
Someone was screaming inside the incinerator. The year was 1975. The location was a top-secret refinery and waste disposal plant, one of the many front organizations owned and operated by the SCP Foundation. This sprawling facility, separated into 3 different huge units, each with a specialized task, was located around 75 kilometers outside of Summer Springs, Colorado. It had operated for several decades without incident, but today all hell was about to break loose. Alarms were blaring in Unit C, the area of the facility that dealt with destroying non-anomalous waste via incineration. A traumatized worker had pulled the emergency lever near one of the incinerators in a panic when he'd first heard the loud banging against the interior walls, and then those horrific pained wails. That's when workers of Unit C came to a horrifying realization. The screams weren't just coming from one of the incinerators in Unit C. They were coming from all 6, a chorus of absolute agony echoing up out of the ash pits. This was impossible as far as the Unit C staff were concerned. These incinerators were only to be used for confirmed non-anomalous material. Could some animals or even some poor workers somehow fallen into the incinerators? But even if they had, what were the odds that someone had fallen in all 6 of them at once? It was impossible. The site director was immediately brought in to authorize an investigation, at which point he determined that at least one of the furnaces, in this case furnace number 4, be shut off so researchers and guards could investigate what was going on inside. It seemed like the obvious course of action, but for some of the people on site that day, this would prove to be a fatal mistake. When the fires were put out, something started rattling in the disposal chute. There was a scratching and squealing noise, like something scraping up against the metal. A maintenance worker was ordered to go check inside, and when he opened the hatch, he let out a bone-chilling shriek. There was something, or was it someone, climbing back up the disposal chute. It emerged from the darkness, backlit by the still-burning embers of the incinerator, letting out an awful screeching noise that could make even a hardened mobile task force operative shake with fear. The creature was humanoid, a charred, mutilated skeleton reaching out towards the maintenance worker with a bony claw. Before the worker had a chance to stumble back in horror, the beast had clasped him by the throat and started to squeeze. It didn't even need to strangle him. The heat of its skeletal hand burned away the worker's throat in seconds, leaving his limp, wheezing body to drop to the metal grate of the platform below him. Several armed guards and maintenance workers moved forward to fend off the monster, but just then a volley of more violent shrieks echoed out of the chute behind it. It only took seconds for over a dozen more creatures to crawl out of the disposal chute. They were all like the first, people at various stages of incineration. Some were glowing, charred skeletons with barely any flesh, others looking more like severe burn victims, their faces contoured into scowls of hate and rage. The assembled guards opened fire on the sudden influx of anomalies, emptying the magazines of their submachine guns into their burning bodies, but their weapons didn't seem to cause any lasting damage. The bullets would tear through the flesh of the creatures, causing some of them to stumble and fall, but the wounds would close and the creatures would rise again. It seemed they possessed a deadly combo of extremely high aggression and incredible regenerative abilities. None of the staff present in Unit C were safe as the burning corpses attacked anyone they could find with their bare hands, beating and biting and clawing. Many of them would grapple with Foundation personnel, latching onto them and trying to pull them back down into the incinerator with them. These creatures, that would later be known as SCP-2419-A, caused several fatalities with their surprise attack that day, and the situation was only brought back under control when a mobile task force that possessed more advanced training and weaponry was dispatched to the location. Despite orders from the site director, the MTF found it impossible to actually terminate any of the entities due to their regenerative abilities. Instead, the MTF agents focused on forcing the anomalies back into the chute of Incinerator Number 4 using a powerful industrial steam lance. Once they were back inside, the incinerator's burners were started up once again. The MTFs were also able to capture 5 of the entities and detain them for questioning and experimentation, finally bringing this unexpected containment breach to an end. The Foundation is an organization that prides itself on possessing forbidden and secret knowledge, but even they had no idea what had just happened. There seemed to be no earthly explanation why these creatures would suddenly manifest inside the incinerators. But as the detained anomalies continued regenerating, a slightly clearer picture of what exactly the Foundation was dealing with began to emerge. Every single one of the captured anomalies kept regenerating, and upon getting to the point that they were no longer burn-scarred, the researchers studying the anomalous creatures discovered that each one was identical to a deceased D-class from the Foundation's records. They were physically and genetically identical to the dead Class D personnel, perfect copies, save for the fact that their sole mission in life seemed to now be pure and unmitigated aggression and violence. Researchers wanted to gain greater insight into the minds of these strange creatures through the use of extensive psychological evaluations and interviews. It would turn out to be a very dangerous investigation. A psychological researcher by the name of Dr. Warren conducted an interview with one of the SCP-2419-A instances in hopes of better understanding their mindset. This creature had been heard laughing not long before the interview began, so it wasn't an unreasonable assumption to believe that it could be capable of speech. The interviewee was separated from Dr. Warren by a thick pane of glass to prevent it from indulging in any of its more violent urges. The problem was that Dr. Warren and his assistant researchers had severely underestimated what these creatures were capable of doing to get what they wanted. Dr. Warren tried to begin the interview in good faith. He spoke calmly and politely to the creature through the glass, attempting to remind it of the person it once was. The anomaly didn't appear to be paying attention to the doctor, though, instead focusing on pulling its own arm apart and breaking the bones within. Dr. Warren began to think that the creatures weren't even sentient, if the only activity they seemed to engage in was the wanton destruction of themselves and others. But underestimating them like this proved to be a big mistake. By removing the skin off of its arm and whittling its bone down to sharp edges, the anomaly had transformed its arm into a makeshift knife. Before anyone realized this, it had already used its own jagged bones to break the glass divider and attack Dr. Warren. He perished not long after being stabbed multiple times in his face and eyes, and the anomaly was forcefully taken back to its holding cell. Dr. Daniel Jennings, a senior researcher, was then put on the case. He released a chilling memo of the creatures after his observation period ended. It read, "Before I came here, I worked as a prison shrink. Every person you met had a story bursting with pain and sorrow. Sometimes these stories were about the pain they suffered. Sometimes it was about the pain they inflicted. Some days you felt like everyone there was a beautiful soul torn down by their circumstances. Other days you'd find out what some of them did, and a part of you was glad that they were there to suffer for it. But at the end of every day, I always told myself, they're all humans. They're all people. They all deserve the same dignity, respect, and love as everyone else. No exceptions." Dr. Jennings goes on, "I opened up with that anecdote only so that you could understand that what I'm about to say is not said lightly. These things are not people. They are people-shaped monsters. They are well beyond any definition of psychopathy. Everything they do to hurt, maim, and kill. I would pity them, but that would imply that they're worth pitying. Put them in a hole, then fill that hole with concrete. Better still, throw them back into the incinerator where you found them. I doubt they'll even care." Following this string of unfortunate incidents, containment procedures were put into place to hopefully prevent anything that had happened to the unlucky Foundation staff from happening again. The entire facility was fenced off and was constantly patrolled by MTF Beta 7, also known as the Maz Hatters, a group specializing in containing anomalies which present powerful biological, chemical, or radiological dangers. The furnaces that the anomalous creatures emerge from remain lit at all times, with workers checking and carrying out maintenance on every single one each day of the week. Outside of this, the facility is essentially a no-go zone. Reinforced steel hatches cover the chutes, and they are to forever remain bolted shut. All because of that one terrifying day in 1975. That was the day that the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Facility, which had been a valuable asset to the Foundation for decades, instead became classified as the Euclid-class anomaly, SCP-2419. It is not uncommon for a Foundation asset to one day become a dangerous anomaly requiring containment, but the same question always pops up after. Why? What had a place that had been so valuable to the Foundation suddenly become such an active danger? The answer, as is often the case, is contained within the question. Why would a waste disposal plant be so important to the Foundation in the first place? And more importantly, what else was going on at the plant to make it such an area of active importance for one of the most powerful organizations in the entire world? To put it simply, the plant allowed the Foundation to dispose of something far more important than mere waste material. It gave them what they needed to better erase memories. As you probably already know, the Foundation makes liberal use of amnestics on those exposed to anomalous material to make them forget what they had seen and experienced. But these elusive chemicals, many of which are sourced from SCP-3000, are an inexact science. However, at the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Plant, researchers discovered an immensely valuable alternative. Much of what was disposed of in the incinerators of Unit C were the bodies of dead D-Class personnel. Before being burned, autopsies were performed on the bodies to make sure they were non-anomalous, including the brain. Back in the 1960s, while performing research on the brains of dead D-Classes, they found a method of extracting and distilling the positive memories of the dead, creating a kind of happy soup. When administered into someone who has undergone amnestic treatment, this happy soup creates positive false memories in their mind that fills in those pesky blank spaces that are often behind. This was so useful that happy memories were extracted from the minds of every single D-Class corpse that passed through Unit C, totaling well into the thousands by the time that the first SCP-2419-A instances began to rise. But as all happiness, joy, and love were removed from the minds of the D-Classes, it seemed that all that was left was pure hate, pain, violence and fury, feelings too intense and evil to destroy. These were bodies imbued with a malice so powerful that no fire could ever burn them away. They exist now with single-minded determination to get out and destroy everything around them, everything, including the ones that made them, the SCP Foundation itself. And in the end, it's only a matter of time until they get out. There are thousands of them in there, unable to die, unable to stop. The only thing keeping them in there is the constant burning of the furnaces around them, and those furnaces can't burn forever. The monsters lurking in SCP-2419 will outlive the fire that surrounds them, because while the furnaces they are contained in are hot, the fires of hate that burn within SCP-2419 entities are even more powerful. And they know this. They know they can't be contained forever, and that someday soon, they'll be able to emerge and exact their terrible revenge. Those who must walk past the incinerators may think they hear their screams echoing out from within, but it's not screaming at all. It's laughter. Now check out SCP-1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer, and SCP-3999, I am at the center of everything that happens to me, for more tales of terror from the SCP Foundation.